Chapter 833. Dragon. Seeing the appearance of this giant beast, a name popped up in Gray's mind, and he read it out loud. It was a dragon, not a dragon beast. Dragon was a name that could only be given to blood beasts at the law level. Those below the law level could only be called dragon beasts, even if they looked similar. Different names represented huge differences in combat strength. No matter how strong a dragon beast was, it could only reach the calamity level, but dragons were different. The starting point of combat strength was at the law level, and each dragon had the terrifying combat strength to easily crush dragon beasts. I hope it won't disappoint me. A hint of excitement appeared on Gray's face. Although he had encountered several law blood beasts in the past half a month, they were all at the ordinary law level, not the kind of law blood beast he was looking for. He hoped that this blood beast would be an exception. Roar. With a roar, the silver dragon was less than a mile away from Gray. With its speed several times the speed of sound, it only took a few dozen seconds to cross a distance of several dozen miles. In just a few moments, it was already close to Gray. A terrifying aura surged over, as if a mountain was collapsing and the ground was splitting apart. The air froze. This was not a metaphor, but a fact. At the law level, the boundary between reality and illusion had long been broken. Even formless pressure could affect matter. Among them, the most exaggerated one Gray had seen was the Koro Saint. Just the release of his pressure was enough to cause spatial tears. The silver dragon naturally cannot do this. If he could do it, the most important thing for Gray to do now was to escape. Boom! A huge claw slapped down toward Gray, accompanied by densely packed spatial cracks. It was as if a huge pillar had descended from the heavens. The sun sword appeared in Gray's hand, meeting this giant claw. Clang! The two collided, and at the point of collision, a terrifying shockwave spread out, causing spatial tears to appear one after another in a large circular area. As for the two sides of the collision, the silver dragon's body that was flying forward came to a halt, while Gray couldn't help but retreat several hundred meters. Whoosh! The silver dragon crossed the several hundred meters in an instant, its giant tail tearing through space and whipping at Gray. Clang! The sun's sword blocked the oncoming tail and was forced back several hundred meters. Clang, clang, clang. The two of them collided with each other using their physical strength, causing cracks to appear in the space around them. Let's not talk about the power of the blood fiends for now. Their physical strength is even stronger than mine. Gray teleported several miles away and shook his slightly numb arm. Then, a trace of expectation appeared on his face. Currently, his realm was already at the veteran level of the precepts. Even his physical strength alone was enough to reach the ordinary level of the precepts. For the silver dragon to be slightly stronger than him, it either had a law ability that strengthened its body or, like him, had a realm comparable to a veteran law powerhouse. He hoped that it was the latter because it was the only way he could find the blood beast of rule he was looking for. Boom! The silver dragon crossed the distance of several miles in a few breaths. Along with the space crack, it clawed at Gray. Give it your all. Having already figured out the strength of the silver dragon's physical body, Gray no longer had any thoughts of competing in physical strength with the silver dragon. With a horizontal slash of his sword, an extremely compressed dark green mist slashed at the silver dragon's giant claw. Boom! A terrifying impact exploded on the silver dragon's giant claw. Along with a series of space cracks, the silver dragon's huge body was immediately sent flying several miles away before stabilizing itself. Not bad defense. Gray looked at the silver dragon's claw with some surprise. There was a faint trace of corrosion on the claw. Although he did not use any law ability, with his current realm as a veteran law powerhouse and the sun sword's amplification, the dark green mist of his four-elemental ability was enough to reach the level of a veteran law powerhouse. However, it only left such a shallow wound. It was clear that the silver dragon's defense was quite strong. Gray was even more convinced that this was a precept's blood fiend that surpassed the ordinary level of the precepts. Roar! Sensing that Gray was not easy to deal with, the silver dragon roared, its golden vertical eye emitting a fierce aura. Then, the color of its originally silver body changed. In an extremely short period of time, it turned from silver to gold, as if it was made out of gold. Boom! The golden dragon pounced at Gray, its terrifying speed causing a series of explosions in the air. Swish! The sun sword in Gray's hand slashed out, and a compressed dark green mist immediately collided with the giant dragon. Clang! In the face of this dark green mist, the dragon did not dodge at all and continued to pounce at Gray. The dark green mist crashed into the dragon's body, and after a dull metallic sound, it completely dissipated. There was not a trace of damage on the dragon's body where it had been struck. Even its movement speed was not affected. An ability to strengthen its defense. Gray's expression changed slightly as he dodged the dragon's giant claw with a teleport. When the dragon's body was still silver, its defense was already quite strong. Even veteran law powerhouse's attacks could only leave a shallow wound. Now, after the surface of his body had turned golden, his defense had become extremely terrifying. Not only could the attacks of veteran law enforcers not leave any wounds, they could not even impede his movements. This was a sign of extremely strong defense, indicating that the opponent's defense far exceeded its attack power. Boom! The giant dragon pounced once again, and one of its huge wings was like a giant blade that was 100 meters long, slashing down at Gray. Hum! A small pitch-black ball appeared and shot out in front of Gray, slamming into the dragon's wing. Boom! The dragon's slashing wing paused, and its massive body seemed to have been hit by a mountain. The scales on its wing that had been struck by the small pitch-black ball fell off, and a circular wound appeared, dripping with blood. Its defense has been strengthened so much. This must be a law ability that specializes in strengthening its defense. Looking at the wound on the dragon's wing, Gray narrowed his eyes. Although the dragon had been injured, this injury was only a scratch compared to the dragon's massive body. Even without the amplification of the golden sword and the law of curses, the power of the small black ball was definitely enough to reach the peak level of veteran law elementalists. However, it only left a scratch on the dragon's skin. One could only imagine how powerful the dragon's defense was. Whoosh! With a sudden flap of its wings, a raging gust of wind was stirred up. The giant dragon pounced on Gray, its huge body twisting, and a huge tail full of spikes whipped towards Gray. Boom! The small pitch-black ball blocked the tail, and Gray teleported away, immediately using the curse law to strengthen himself. Shrouded in blood-red light, Gray's basic abilities were greatly enhanced, and with the amplification of the golden sword, the small pitch-black ball quickly expanded, turning into a pitch-black ball the size of a soccer ball. Clang! The pitch-black ball turned into a pitch-black sword, letting out a trembling sound that caused space to shatter. Facing the incoming dragon, it turned into a terrifying black light and pierced toward the dragon's heart. Pooh! The dragon clearly sensed the danger from the pitch-black sword and dodged to the side, but the pitch-black sword was simply too fast, and the dragon could not completely avoid it. Although it missed its heart, it still pierced through the dragon's abdomen and came out from its back. Roar! Its entire body was pierced through, and blood flowed out from its abdomen and back like a fountain. This time, the injury was no longer a scratch, but a real wound that could affect the dragon. The dragon roared angrily, its golden vertical eye glaring at Gray in anger and fear. Even with its powerful defense, it could not help but feel fear toward the might of the pitch-black sword. Following that, an indescribable power appeared on his body. Then his originally golden body actually began to rapidly dissipate, dissipating like a thick fog. Suddenly, Gray felt a strong sense of danger coming from ahead, and he reflexively put up a spatial barrier in front of him. Bang! The moment the spatial barrier was put up, it collided with something and a muffled sound was heard. Although it had clearly blocked something, the danger was not over. Soon, Gray felt a sense of danger coming from the other side of the spatial barrier. Whoosh! With a teleport, Gray retreated several miles away, and then, Without hesitation, he set up one spatial barrier after another around himself, forming a spatial cage. Bang! 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 The spatial cage had only been formed for a short while, but there was already a violent collision on the spatial barrier, as if a giant beast was constantly slamming its claws, tail, and wings. The second law ability is the law of concealment. With a thought, Gray recognized this law ability. The law of concealment was a law that could hide oneself in the environment. It was different from the concealment disk that Gray had heard of in the dimension, and this concealment was perfect. Not only was the body hidden, but it also hid one's aura, body temperature, movement, the light of the blood beast ability, and other phenomena that could be sensed and observed. In the face of such perfect concealment, if not for his instincts warning him, he would very likely have been injured by the other party's sneak attack. Moreover, even if he could rely on his instincts to dodge once or twice, he could not rely on his instincts to dodge continuously. Therefore, he made a prompt decision to set up a spatial cage around himself, protecting himself in the cage. It really gave me a pleasant surprise. Greg's face lit up. The law of concealment was undoubtedly an extremely powerful law, and it could be seen from the fact that it could force him to defend himself. And if he killed and revived such a blood beast of law, it would undoubtedly greatly increase his battle strength. Of course, before that, there was still a problem in front of him. How could he kill this invisible blood beast of law? The law of concealment could be said to be perfect, and it made him like a blind man in front of this giant dragon. He did not even know where it was, let alone kill it. Chapter 834. Got it. Soon, Gray had an idea. He opened the plane and summoned Saint Luofu. With the law of chains and the law of enchantment, Saint Luofu had the ability to break the law of concealment. As long as the law of concealment was broken, he would have the ability to kill the dragon. Get ready. Yes. After hearing Gray's order, Saint Luofu quickly created silver chains to protect himself and Gray in the middle. Then, Gray removed the spatial barrier. Boom! Without the protection of the spatial barrier, the hidden dragon's eyes shot out a fierce light. Although it was strange that there were two enemies, it did not hesitate to use its claw to attack the two of them. This was an attack that was enough to cause a loud roar and cracks in space. However, under the law of concealment, all kinds of phenomena were hidden. But this did not mean that the power of the attack was weakened. Not only was it not weakened, it was actually strengthened. Whether it was the loud roar or the cracks in space, they would all weaken the attack to a certain extent. Without these effects, the attack became even stronger. Ding, ding, ding. Gray and Saint Luofu were surrounded by silver chains. When the dragon's claw slammed down, it could not avoid hitting the silver chains and coming into contact with the law of enchantment on the silver chains. In an instant, the law of concealment lost its effect and the dragon's body became clear. Without needing Gray's orders, one silver chain after another had already wrapped around the dragon's body, following the dragon's 4 giant legs and wrapping around the dragon's body. Hula! The hidden law was broken. The law ability to strengthen the body was also broken, and it was also bound by the silver chains. The giant dragon immediately felt that something was wrong. It no longer cared about attacking Gray and Luofu's Saint. It flapped its wings, and its 4 legs struggled violently. A power that surpassed normal laws burst forth, wanting to break free from the silver chains. Unfortunately, as a product of the law of chains, the silver chains had the characteristic of toughness. Even Gray had to use the law of curses and the golden sword to strengthen his battle prowess before he could destroy them. With the destructive power of a dragon, it was clearly impossible for him to do that. Creak! The silver chains were pulled taut, but did not break. The dragon's 4 legs were tied up, and its huge body was hung in the air. The law of enchantment is really a powerful law. Looking at the dragon that was tied up, Gray sighed. Luofu Saint's law ability was definitely one of the strongest among the many law abilities, and he had only managed to kill his opponent by displaying extraordinary battle prowess. Now, when faced with a giant dragon that also grasped 2 types of laws, This kind of nomological ability suddenly became easy to handle, easily subduing the giant dragon. It's a pity that I can't get it. After seeing how powerful the law of enchantment was, Gray naturally considered to choose the law of enchantment. Unfortunately, after asking Saint Luofu about the 5 laws of enchantment, he gave up. The 5 constituent abilities of the magic seal law overlapped with his current nomological abilities. Due to the uniqueness of the ability, he was destined to never obtain the magic seal law. Clang! Pu the pitch-black sword emitted a terrifying aura as it pierced through the chest of the dragon that was tied up in the air and unable to move. It easily pierced through the dragon's chest and came out from its back. The law ability that strengthened the body was also ineffective under the enchantment of enchantment. The dragon's body defense was like paper in front of the black sword. Roar, roar, roar with its heart pierced. Even with the powerful recovery ability of a law blood fiend, it could not recover naturally. However, with its strong vitality, it would not die immediately. The dragon let out an unwilling roar. It did not understand why the human in front of it was stronger than the ones it had met before. Once, it visited an island in the sea. The island was filled with such weak humans. It did not need to use much effort to turn all the humans on the island into food. After a while, the roar stopped and the dragon died. After spending more than an hour to revive the dragon, Gray left the island and continued his search in the endless sea. More than 10 days later, he encountered a few more law blood fiends. However, after exchanging blows, he found that they were all normal law blood fiends. He let them go after taking some blood. One day, he passed by an island with a diameter of more than 100 miles. He found that there was black smoke billowing from the center of the island. There was also a terrifying heat in the air. A volcano, and it's alive? Gray flew toward the center of the island. It was recorded in some books that there were precious metals near volcanoes. He wanted to see if he could find some. After flying for dozens of miles, Gray saw the volcano that was billowing black smoke. The huge volcano extended for more than 10 miles. The crater was also a few miles in diameter. Black smoke billowed out from the crater of the volcano. It stood in the sky like a thick black pillar. With the volcano as the center, Gray searched. After half a day, he appeared near the crater. Other than the crater, he had searched everywhere else. However, he did not find any valuable metals. He was very sure that he did not miss any. With the metal ability, even precious metals buried in the ground could not escape his senses. Looking at the crater of the volcano, Gray descended towards it. The ice ability enveloped him, controlling the temperature around him. The temperature near the volcano had already reached hundreds of degrees. The temperature at the crater must be even higher. Gray could easily withstand this temperature. However, the clothes on his body could not, so he used the ice ability to control the surrounding temperature. Pata! He landed at the crater. The temperature at the crater was over 1,000 degrees. However, the rocks at the crater should be some kind of extremely fire-resistant rock. Under this temperature, there were no signs of melting. After searching around the crater, Gray decisively flew into the crater. While enduring the increasing temperature, he searched for precious metals. Soon, he was hundreds of meters deep. At this time, the temperature inside the volcano had reached thousands of degrees. The hot red magma could be seen clearly. He still did not find anything. Just as he was about to give up, he suddenly found a huge stone platform in the center of the crater. On this huge stone platform, there was a sword. He landed on the stone platform and looked at the sword. It was a pitch-black sword. It was very rough and huge. It was 100 meters long, and its surface was full of uneven marks. The position of the hilt was not obvious. It did not look like it was made for a human. Instead, it looked like it was made for some kind of giant beast with hands and feet. Can such a huge sword really be used? Gray suspected that this huge sword only had the shape and could not increase one's ability. He walked forward and touched the huge sword, infusing his wind ability. Along with the infusion of the wind attribute energy, the surface of the huge sword suddenly spread with a cyan light and emitted a sharp aura. The sharp aura collided with the surrounding rocks that were not melted by the magma, and immediately left scratches on the solid rocks. It can actually increase combat power. Gray was slightly surprised when he withdrew his wind ability. Not only could this huge sword increase the Blood Fiend's ability, but the extent of the increase was not low. Conservatively speaking, this was at least an inherited weapon. He really did not know which Master Blacksmith's prank was, fusing together materials that could be used to forge hundreds of inherited weapons to forge a super huge inherited weapon that was not suitable for human use. Even if he was now a law powerhouse, he could not help but feel that this person's approach was too wasteful. Even if there was good stuff, it should not be wasted like this. I don't know if it can be reforged. Gray tried to pull the huge sword with both hands and stuffed it into the plane. Although the huge sword was extremely huge and heavy, it was still slowly pulled up in front of Gray's law power. Suddenly, the magma began to churn violently, as if there was a huge monster stirring the magma. Then, the magma splashed and half of a huge monster's body was exposed. It was a huge beast with 2 sharp horns on its head and scarlet scales all over its body. Although not all of its body was exposed, conservatively speaking, the huge beast body was at least 100 meters tall because its exposed body was already more than 50 meters. It was unknown if this huge beast was sleeping or if it was obstructed by the magma, but Gray did not feel the slightest bit of its aura before. Roar! Seeing that Gray was about to pull out the huge sword, a terrifying aura erupted from the huge beast's body. A huge palm with scarlet scales suddenly slapped at Gray, accompanied by the magma, fiercely slapping down. If Gray still wanted to pull out the huge sword, it was very likely that he would be slapped under the huge palm. Whoosh! Gray made a prompt decision and gave up on the huge sword. He teleported hundreds of meters away to avoid the huge palm, but the huge palm slapped on the solid stone platform. Crack! The solid stone platform completely collapsed, and the huge sword also fell, sliding into the magma. However, before it completely slid into the magma, it was caught by another huge hand of the huge beast. The huge sword was clearly 100 meters long, but did not feel out of place in the huge beast's hand. This huge beast's identity as the owner of the huge sword was undoubtedly revealed. Gray even had a bold guess that this huge sword was forged from the precious metals collected by this huge beast. This was a very inconceivable guess, but he faintly felt that it was very possible. Roar! Holding the huge sword, the huge beast stared fiercely at Gray. Its huge mouth roared, revealing huge and white teeth. Then, a pitch-black fireball with a diameter of dozens of meters suddenly appeared, exuding a terrifying temperature of tens of thousands of degrees. It crashed into Gray, who was hundreds of meters away. Whoosh! Feeling the terror of the pitch-black fireball, Gray teleported outside the volcano. The volcano wall, where he was just now, was directly burned through by the power of the pitch-black fireball. The pitch-black fireball was like a cannonball shot out of a huge ship into the distance. It directly rushed out of the island and fell into the sea. A large amount of seawater was immediately evaporated, causing a huge whirlpool. Not only that, whether it was the melted volcano wall or the surface of the sea, the black flames continued to burn, burning fiercely without extinguishing. Chapter 835. The Law of Flames. Gray grew cautious. He could not come into contact with this black flame, or else it would be very troublesome. This black flame was a product of the Law of Flames, and had the characteristic of never being extinguished. Once wrapped around, it would continue to burn, and there was almost no way to extinguish it. In the end, one's entire body would be burned to ashes. Boom! The earth quaked, and the entire island trembled. From the hole in the volcano, a crimson beast covered in scales leapt out and appeared outside the volcano. As Gray had guessed, the crimson beast was indeed over 100 meters tall, close to 150 meters. Wielding a 100-meter-long greatsword, it roared at the sky, its black eyes larger than millstones looking at Gray like black flames were burning within. Thump! When it saw Gray, it fiercely stomped on the ground. Beneath its stomp, Cracks that extended for miles appeared one after another. Dirt and stones flew everywhere. Its massive body leapt into the air. Woo! In the air, the great sword in its hand slashed at Gray like a mountain. The air exploded, and the great sword's trajectory was filled with spatial cracks. Gray hurriedly retreated, dodging the great sword's sweep, but a moment later, the Crimson Beast's massive body moved 100 meters in the air against common sense. After closing the distance between it and Gray, the great sword swept at Gray once more. As a blood beast of laws, the Crimson Beast was the same as a powerhouse of laws. Although it did not have wings, it still had the ability to fly. However, as a land creature, it preferred to rely on its legs to run on the ground. Gray did not retreat. In front of him, a small black ball appeared, turning into a black light that crashed into the greatsword. Clang! Although the black ball was small, it possessed the terrifying power of a veteran powerhouse of laws. The terrifying impact was transmitted through the greatsword to the Crimson Beast body. The Crimson Beast's massive figure in the air immediately crashed to the ground, smashing a huge crater in the ground. Roar! The Crimson Behemoth flipped over and got up. A black fireball that was dozens of meters in size, like a meteor burning with black flames, crashed into Gray in the sky. Whoosh! The small black ball that had returned to Gray's side shot out rapidly and collided with the black fireball with its disproportionate size. Poof! The black fireball immediately exploded, turning into black flames that fell onto the island. The flames continued to burn on the island, while the small black fireball, burning with black flames, crashed into the red behemoth. The 100-meter-long sword in the Crimson Behemoth's hand swept horizontally, instantly slapping away the greatly weakened pitch-black ball. At the same time, a huge black fireball crashed towards Gray, leaving behind dense, web-like spatial cracks in its path. Whoosh! Gray teleported away to avoid the black fireball. He recalled the small black ball that was still burning with black flames and would not be completely destroyed for a while. He then attacked the red behemoth from behind. Although the Crimson Beast's body was huge, its agility was not bad. Feeling the movement behind it, it suddenly turned around and blocked with its giant sword. Clang! The giant sword was deflected by the terrifying impact, and the small black ball hit the red behemoth's body. The scales on the red behemoth's body splashed, and a hideous wound appeared. Whether it was the giant sword or the wound, because of the black flames burning on the small black ball, they were all attached to the black flames. However, the red behemoth was after all the controller of the black flames, and it easily eliminated the black flames on the giant sword and the wound. Roar! With its body injured, the red behemoth roared angrily. Its black eyes were filled with ferocity as it stared at Gray. A black fireball with a diameter of several dozen meters was shot out like a cannonball from the main cannon of a giant ship. Accompanied by cracks in space, it crashed towards Gray. Whoosh! Gray teleported away and attacked the red behemoth with the small black ball burning with black flames. Whoosh! The red behemoth nimbly turned around, and the giant sword in its hand was burning with black flames. It slashed out to meet the small black ball. Boom! The small black ball collided with the giant sword burning with black flames. The small black ball was sent flying backward, and the red behemoth's body swayed slightly. The black flames that had been amplified by the giant sword had clearly increased in power, and were now on the same level as the small black ball. Whoosh! Stabilizing its body, the red behemoth attacked first, slashing out with its sword. Surging black flames spread out, turning into a sea of black flames that extended towards Gray. Whoosh! Gray teleported away to avoid the sea of black flames. The sea of black flames spread over the island, and a few dozen kilometers of the island burned with raging black flames. Its power has increased so much that it's comparable to a law weapon's amplification. The giant sword is a law weapon. Gray looked at the giant sword burning with black flames in surprise. When he had tested the giant sword before, he had only tested it with a wisp of wind ability. He had not used his full strength, so he did not feel the extent of the giant sword's amplification. However, now that he saw the red behemoth attack, he was shocked to find that the giant sword's amplification was comparable to a law weapon. Although the workmanship was a little rough, it was undoubtedly a law weapon. No, the giant sword's materials are all heritage weapon materials. Logically speaking, it shouldn't be able to reach the level of a law weapon. Could it be that the quantitative change has caused a qualitative change? Gray was bewildered. Although he was not a refiner, he was someone with metal ability. He could clearly feel the type of metal in the giant sword. They were all extremely precious materials that could be used to make heritage weapons, but there were no rare law weapon materials. Logically speaking, a magic weapon refined in such a way should only be at the heritage level at best, but it had reached the law level. This made Gray wonder if the quantitative change had caused a qualitative change. After all, the materials used to make this giant sword were enough to make hundreds of law weapons. With so many materials causing a qualitative change, it broke the boundary between heritage and law. As Gray and the red behemoth fought, the island was like the end of the world. Under the red behemoth's black flames, the entire island was covered in black flames. The raging black flames had the characteristic of never being extinguished, burning the island. Whoosh! Another sea of black flames attacked Gray, but Gray did not dodge. The combat power test is almost done. This red behemoth combat power is not weaker than a veteran law powerhouse, and it has a law weapon. It has the value of being hunted and turned into a puppet. The law of curse enveloped Gray's body, and the sun's sword appeared in Gray's hand. The small black ball turned into a black ball the size of a soccer ball and crashed into the sea of black flames. Rumble! The black sea of fire was smashed into pieces, and black flames splashed all over the sky, sprinkling all over the island. The pitch-black ball wrapped in black flames attacked the red behemoth. Clang! The red behemoth blocked with its giant sword, but the giant sword was knocked away by the unparalleled power and fell from the red behemoth's hand. The pitch-black ball hit the crimson behemoth, leaving a hideous wound on its body before it finally ran out of energy and turned back. Whoosh! Having lost its weapon, the crimson behemoth panicked. It used its metal ability, and the greatsword quickly returned to the crimson behemoth. But just as the greatsword returned to the crimson behemoth's hand, the black ball once again attacked Gray. Puffed! The red behemoth blocked with its giant hand, but the black ball crashed through the red behemoth's hand and penetrated its chest, coming out of its back. A huge hole appeared on the red behemoth's chest and back, and red blood spurted out like a fountain. Dong! The giant sword finally returned to the red behemoth's hand, but the red behemoth no longer had the strength to attack. Its body staggered, and it had to use the giant sword to stabilize its body. The red behemoth glared fiercely at Gray. It wanted to swing its sword at Gray, but it no longer had the strength to do so. Its strength quickly disappeared from its body. Clang! A few minutes later, the red behemoth fell heavily to the ground with the sound of a mountain collapsing. It was completely silent. Gray walked forward and used his puppet ability. The red behemoth's injuries were healing, and its soul was being reorganized into a new soul. More than an hour later, the red behemoth came back to life. Its huge body stood up from the ground, but the gaze it looked at Gray with had lost its ferocious look and became friendly. Using the soul connection, Gray used his puppet ability to communicate with the red behemoth and asked it about the origin of the giant sword. Ordinary blood fiends naturally could not do this, but the red behemoth, as a blood fiend of laws, had the intelligence of a child and could already express itself to a certain extent. Soon, the communication had a result, and Gray's eyes were filled with shock. The giant sword was indeed refined by the red behemoth itself. Chapter 836. The crimson behemoth really did refine the greatsword itself. Gray's face was filled with shock. His guess had been confirmed. The greatsword had indeed been refined by the crimson behemoth by collecting all kinds of metal materials. Shocking, extremely shocking. A blood beast had actually refined a magic weapon, and this magic weapon's grade was even at the law grade. A law weapon was a weapon that many sacred organizations did not have the ability to refine. On one hand, law materials were hard to find, and on the other hand, weapon refiners who could refine law weapons were hard to find. Even in the history of the origin world, there were only a handful of master artificers who could refine law weapons, and they were even rarer than law enforcers. It was due to this reason that there were so few sacred grade forces with law weapons. Yet in the endless ocean, a law blood beast had actually refined a law weapon. How inconceivable was this? Quantitative changes can really lead to qualitative changes. Gray continued to ask, confirming his previous guess. This great sword was indeed refined from many heritage grade metals, and there were no law grade metals among them. The reason it could reach the law grade was that quantitative changes had led to qualitative changes. The large amount of heritage grade metals had raised the greatsword's grade to the law grade. This was definitely a new way to refine heritage grade weapons. However, a heritage grade weapon refined with this method was simply too large. Only behemoths like the Crimson Behemoth that were over 100 meters long could use it flexibly. Although law powerhouses could wield it, they could not use it flexibly. The reason it can refine a magic weapon is because of a law. Gray continued to ask, and he understood the method the Crimson Behemoth used to refine the magic weapon. Apart from the law of flames, the Crimson Behemoth also possessed another law. This was a law that did not have the slightest bit of combat power, but this law allowed it to know how to collect metals and refine magic weapons. This seemed to be a law that existed specifically for refining magic weapons. With this law, even the Crimson Behemoth, which only had the intelligence of a child, knew how to refine magic weapons. Such a rule has never been recorded in the books. Let's call it the refining rule, since it can be used to refine magic weapons. Gray named this rule. Suddenly, his heart stirred, and his gaze toward the Crimson Beast became scorching hot. If the puppet ability can allow me to control the Crimson Behemoth, then can I control the Crimson Behemoth to forge magic weapons? Gray was tempted. He decided to stay on the island for a day to see if he could make a magical weapon with the help of the Crimson Beast. If he could really use the Crimson Behemoth to refine a magic weapon, or even a weapon that could reach the level of laws, he could use the refinement of a law weapon as a condition to exchange for precious law magic herbs from the various sacred factions. Although rule-type mana herbs were extremely rare, rule-type weapons were even rarer. After all, rule-type weapons could greatly increase the combat power of rule-type powerhouses. He believed that many Saint forces would be willing to refine law weapons in exchange for law attribute mana ingredients. Since he wanted to do it, Gray began to act. He didn't have any materials for a law weapon. Even if he did, he wouldn't dare to try refining one on his first try, so he decided to refine a heritage weapon. Originally, the best method was to try refining a low-level magic weapon. However, with the intelligence of the Crimson Behemoth, it could use the refining law to refine a law weapon. He didn't think that he couldn't even refine a heritage weapon. Moreover, the metal materials he had were all at the level of a heritage weapon. He didn't have anything below that level. After searching through his spatial items, Gray finally chose a piece of crimson metal that weighed more than 25 kilograms. Crimson gold was a fire attribute heritage metal. Heritage weapons refined from this metal would have the fire attribute. Although it would also have an amplification effect on other abilities, the amplification effect on fire was the strongest. Using the puppet ability to control the Crimson Behemoth, Gray took control of the Crimson Behemoth's body. He then used the metal ability of the Crimson Behemoth, and the crimson gold immediately floated above the Crimson Behemoth's palm. Looking at the crimson gold, he used the refining law of the Crimson Behemoth. In an instant, a mysterious change occurred. The method of refining a heritage weapon with the crimson gold naturally appeared in Gray's mind. He immediately had a clear understanding of the difference between a refiner and a refiner. Refiners relied on years of accumulation to summarize the methods and experience of refining magic weapons. The refining law, on the other hand, directly gave the user the method and experience of refining from the law level. This kind of bestowment was of an extremely high level, far surpassing the methods and experience of ordinary refiners. After all, the Crimson Behemoth relied on this kind of bestowment to refine a law weapon. One could imagine how powerful this bestowment was. Let's begin. After simulating the method of refining a law weapon with the crimson gold in his mind several times, Gray began to refine. Whoosh! A cluster of black flames appeared below the crimson gold, calcining it. Under the burning of the black flames, the crimson gold's temperature rapidly rose. 1,000 degrees, 2,000 degrees, 3,000 degrees, 10,000 degrees. Soon, the temperature exceeded 10,000 degrees. The crimson gold had turned red, and the temperature continued to rise. 20,000 degrees, 30,000 degrees, 40,000 degrees, 50,000 degrees. Half an hour later, the crimson gold's temperature had risen to 50,000 degrees. At this time, the red crimson gold began to melt, transforming into a liquid. Soon, the crimson gold completely turned into a pool of crimson gold. The color of the red liquid was extremely beautiful. It was as red as the sunset, and like the clouds, it was constantly changing shape. The black flames continued to burn, and the crimson gold's temperature was maintained at a stable range. Bubbles emerged from the crimson gold as the impurities in the crimson gold were vaporized. An hour later, the crimson gold was no longer bubbling, and its volume had shrunk a little. Gray withdrew the black flames and used the refining law to control the crimson gold to change shape, finally turning into a spear. Then, the refining law enveloped the metal spear. Under the refining law, the metal particles in the spear began to arrange themselves according to a specific law, forming an extremely complicated structure that coincided with a certain law. It was this strange structure that gave the magic weapon the amplification effect. Originally, this step required a master refiner to rely on his own refining experience to shape it, but the refining law directly molded it with the refining law. Moreover, this molding was based on the characteristics of the metal spear, tailor-made, and could maximize the amplification effect. Under the control of the refining law, the crimson gold was thrown into a nearby lake. Rolling mist rose, and the water in the entire lake evaporated. The crimson gold spear's temperature cooled down, and it turned back, stabbing into the ground not far from Gray. It's done. Releasing the control of the crimson gold behemoth, Gray pulled out the crimson gold spear. Unlike the crimson gold behemoth's greatsword, the crimson gold spear was extremely exquisite, with a smooth texture. There was a pattern of a flaming bird on the surface, exquisite like a work of art. The crimson gold behemoth's greatsword was extremely rough, with many uneven marks on the surface. That was because the crimson gold behemoth had a problem with aesthetics, and Gray naturally did not. Therefore, he molded the crimson gold spear to be extremely smooth, and even engraved the pattern of a flaming bird on the surface to increase its beauty. It should be done, but I don't know to what extent. The fire law was injected into the crimson gold spear, and the surface of the crimson gold spear suddenly burned with purple flames. Gray pierced the spear, and a karst cave that was hundreds of meters deep suddenly appeared under his feet, with boiling lava at the bottom. A pinnacle legacy weapon. Looking at the crimson gold spear with satisfaction, Gray put away. Under the effect of the refining law, the crimson gold spear's material characteristics were maximized, and the degree of enhancement was comparable to a pinnacle legacy weapon. It became one of the highest grade weapons in his possession, aside from his son's sword. The rule power is amazing indeed. It can actually allow someone who has never come into contact with refining weapons to refine a pinnacle legacy weapon. Recalling the process of refining the crimson gold spear, Gray could not help but sigh. With the refining law, if he had the materials for a rule weapon, he felt that he could immediately refine a rule weapon, and the level of the rule weapon refined might not be low. The magic seal law had already allowed him to see the uniqueness of the rule power, and the refining law had further allowed him to feel this uniqueness, and he could not help but sigh at the wonders of the rule power. Chapter 837. After staying on the island for a day and crafting another 2 pinnacle magic weapons, Gray left the island to continue his search for the blood beasts of precepts. Soon, a month had passed. During this time, Gray hunted another 3 blood beasts of laws that were comparable to veteran powerhouses of laws, increasing the number of blood beasts of laws to 5. Gray did not intend to hunt any more after reaching this number. This was the limit of his current supply. Blood beasts of laws were alive and needed food. With the current size of the plain, providing 5 blood beasts of laws with food was already the limit. If he increased the number, he would not be able to provide enough food. As for hunting outside, Gray did not intend to do so. Instead of wasting time hunting for blood beasts of laws, he might as well spend it on comprehending laws. To a certain extent, blood beasts of laws were merely external objects. Wasting time on external objects was obviously neglecting the essentials. Although I no longer intend to hunt blood beasts of laws, there is still a need to explore the depths of the endless ocean. Gray continued to explore the depths of the endless ocean. The endless ocean not only had powerful blood beasts of laws, but it also had all sorts of undeveloped islands that had never been explored by humans. On these islands, there was a high chance that there were precious magic herbs and precious materials for refining magic weapons. If he could find them, whether it was for his own use or to exchange for them, it would greatly improve his realm and strength. This was also why many powerhouses of laws who did not have much time left would enter the depths of the endless ocean. Of course, he was aware of the dangers of the endless ocean. If he could already encounter blood beasts of laws that were comparable to veteran powerhouses of laws, if he continued to go deeper, he might encounter blood beasts of laws that were comparable to 3 or even stronger. Teleportation was where his confidence lay. As long as he was not killed in an instant, he could immediately escape tens of thousands of miles away and avoid danger to a large extent. As he went deeper into the endless ocean, as Gray expected, he soon encountered blood beasts of laws that surpassed veteran powerhouses of laws. On the 7th day, he encountered his first blood beast of laws that was comparable to 3 powerhouses of laws. It was a giant bird with 3 heads. Although they did not have as many heads as the Hydra, their battle prowess was enough to leave the Hydra in the dust. Each head grasped a type of rule ability, and they could even mix the rule abilities they grasped and use them together, displaying a terrifying battle prowess that far surpassed veteran rule powerhouses. He didn't fight it head-on, merely testing the waters. After discovering that the 3-headed giant bird had terrifying combat power comparable to that of a master of 3 laws, he immediately retreated with his teleportation ability. On the 12th day, he encountered 2 blood beasts of 3 rules. The combat power of a blood fiend with 3 laws was terrifying. At the center of the battle, the sky was dark and the earth was dark. The seawater was flowing backward, and the surroundings were filled with huge spatial cracks. He hid in the distance, waiting for the 2 sides to fight until both sides were injured. Then he would reap the benefits. However, he had clearly underestimated the intelligence of these 2 Third Edict blood beasts. After the 2 Third Edict blood beasts found out that the other party was not to be trifled with, they decisively called a truce and retreated before both sides suffered heavy losses. His plan to sit back and reap the benefits was aborted. On the 16th day, he encountered a giant fish with a body length of more than 300 meters. The giant fish floated on the surface of the sea, drifting with the waves like a small moving island. Moreover, there was a lot of moss growing on its surface, making it impossible to recognize. He was only able to discover this giant fish because a blood fiend of rules swam past it. The giant fish suddenly bit the blood fiend of rules and swallowed it bite after bite. Throughout the entire process, the blood fiend of rules could not resist at all. When its powerful rule ability collided with the giant fish, it was like scratching an itch for the giant fish. It couldn't even scratch its skin. Almost every few days, Gray would encounter a blood fiend of 3 rules. Even with his teleportation ability, he couldn't help but be more alarmed and cautious the deeper he went. Compared to the danger of encountering a blood fiend of 3 rules, Gray's harvest was also rather bountiful. There were more than 10 grade 6 magic herbs of various attributes, and the materials he collected for inherited weapons were enough to refine 7 or 8 inherited weapons. Such a huge gain, even for someone like him who had high net worth, was still a huge fortune. It was enough to double his assets. A month later, Gray was already hundreds of thousands of miles deep into the endless ocean. There's an island ahead. In front of him, a long and narrow island with an irregular shape appeared in front of him. The island should be more than 100 miles long, but only 20 to 30 miles wide. It was very long and uneven, and it looked a little like a saw. With a teleportation, Gray appeared in the sky above the island. Using his metal ability, he searched for precious metals on the island's surface and even buried within it. He searched carefully from one end to the other. When Gray found the middle of the island, he found a huge rock mountain in the middle of the island. On one side of the rock mountain was a huge cave. From the cave, his metal ability detected the waves of several inherited weapons. There was even a strange metal wave that he had never encountered before. These traces, after landing on the ground, Gray stood at the entrance of the cave. As he looked into the cave, his pupils suddenly shrank. At the edge of the cave, there were huge traces of varying depths. These traces were clearly made by a giant beast with sharp claws. This was not a naturally formed cave. It was dug out by a giant beast with its sharp claws. In other words, this was a giant beast's lair. However, he did not know if this lair had been abandoned or if the giant beast that dug out this lair had died. After a moment of hesitation, Gray walked into the cave with light steps. Although he did not sense the aura of a blood fiend of rules, this did not mean that there was absolutely no blood fiend of rules here. Under some special circumstances, such as an environment that could block the spread of aura, or a blood fiend that actively concealed its own aura, its aura could not be sensed. The inside of the huge lair was extremely dry. Clearly, the giant beast that dug out this lair had used a certain technique to effectively prevent the invasion of moisture. After several hundred meters, the light from the outside could no longer penetrate. It was pitch black inside. However, Gray's vision was not obstructed at all. Not to mention his infrared perception, even the vision of a powerhouse of laws was enough for him to see clearly in such an environment. He continued to go deeper. After several thousand meters and turning a corner, Gray's vision suddenly became bright. It was as if a white gold sun was blooming. In the depths of the cave, something was emitting white gold light. Under the illumination of this white gold light, the surroundings were filled with pieces of metal. Star gold, white silver iron, fine copper. Gray's gaze swept across these pieces of metal. His eyes immediately lit up. Among these metals, there were many that could be used to refine inherited weapons. He walked up and swept these metals into his space item. Then, he looked at the glowing metal. It was the size of a fist and entirely white gold in color. It was as white as jade and had a jade-like texture. When he reached out to touch it, he felt some warmth. White light shone from the surface of the metal. It possessed a pure and holy aura that could make people calm down involuntarily. Is this radiant metal? A sliver of joy appeared in Gray's eyes. Radiant metal was a material used to refine weapons of laws. The Radiant St. Hall's radiant sword was refined from this metal. One could imagine how precious this metal was. It's a pity that it's too small. If it were a few times bigger, it would be enough to refine a weapon of laws. With some regret, Gray stored the radiant metal in his space item. After searching around the lair and finding nothing else, Gray left. Flying into the sky, Gray prepared to search the other parts of the island. At this moment, asterisk crack, asterisk a crisp sound rang out in the sky. Afterwards, the sky cracked open like a huge piece of glass, revealing a hole that was several hundred meters in diameter. It was pitch black inside the hole, but in this pitch black darkness, there were two golden lights, like two burning golden flames, rushing out from the pitch black hole. In the next moment, the two golden flames charged out of the hole and revealed their original appearance. They were the two eyes of a terrifying beast. Most of the terrifying beast's body was still in the pitch black hole. Only its head was exposed, but just the exposed head was enough to make Gray shiver in fright. It was a huge head that was 100 meters long. There were no scales on the surface. Instead, had stone-like skin. It seemed extremely rough. There was a huge horn that was over a dozen meters long on the top of its head. It was like a huge blade as it was wrapped in lightning. Below the sharp horn were two huge eyes that looked like golden flames. The huge golden eyes emitted an indifferent and cold light, as if they had the power to freeze. Any creature that looked at them would be frozen by the coldness of the huge eyes. Below the two huge golden eyes was a huge mouth with several rows of sharp teeth. The sharp fangs were clearly visible. Each one was as sharp as a knife, as if they were lined up one after another. After the huge beast's head rushed out of the hole in space, it immediately discovered Gray. The two huge golden eyes looked at Gray, and a terrifying pressure descended on Gray. The air froze. Even though Gray was a veteran law powerhouse, he could not help but feel that his body was out of control in the face of this pressure. Asterisk crack. Asterisk, a huge claw reached out from the hole and slapped down on Gray. An unparalleled and terrifying power erupted. A huge hole appeared in space under this huge claw. It was as if there was a part of the world that was pressing down on Gray. Chapter 838. Boom! A gigantic, pitch-black hole appeared in space, and a ravine appeared on the ground. It was as if a part of the world was falling down. Unparalleled power. Under the huge claw, Gray sensed unparalleled power. Even with the amplification of the laws of curses and the sun sword in his hand, it was difficult to block the huge claw that slammed down. Crack! In the air, the place where Gray was standing was torn apart. Spatial cracks spread out one after another, and a huge and pitch-black hole appeared. It was like a huge mirror that had been smashed into pieces by this huge claw, splashing out in all directions. After smashing the space with one palm, the giant beast looked around and did not find any trace of that little fly. It did not know if it had been smashed into meat paste or slapped into space. Accompanied by the sound of space shattering, its gigantic body squeezed out of the hole in space. A large shadow fell on the ground. This was an extremely gigantic beast. It was 1,000 meters long and 600 to 700 meters tall. Its 4 thick legs were like 4 pillars supporting the world. Its entire body had a rock-like texture. It stretched across the sky like a gigantic mountain lying horizontally. It landed on the ground, and the earth immediately shook. The entire island trembled slightly, and then it burrowed into its lair. Not long after, a thunderous roar came from the lair, and the terrifying sound spread out for hundreds of kilometers. In the sea, a large number of fish were stunned and floated on the surface, revealing their white bellies. In the sky, a flock of birds suddenly fell like dumplings. Even hundreds of kilometers away, this furious roar could still be heard. Hearing this roar, one blood fiend after another fled into the distance in panic, forming an extremely exaggerated beast tide in the sea. There was no lack of law blood fiends. Even the law blood fiends felt an intense sense of danger and fled far away. Whoosh! Tens of thousands of kilometers away, Gray's figure appeared. His clothes were tattered, and there were bloody scratches on his body. These are not caused by the giant beast's giant claw, but by the wind pressure caused by the giant claw. He was not hit by the giant beast's giant claw. If he was hit, the wounds on his body would not be as simple as scratches. He would most likely be smashed into meat paste. What terrifying combat power! Cold sweat seeped out of Gray's body. The sweat mixed with blood made him look extremely miserable. Before the giant claw came down, he had already teleported away. Fortunately, he managed to escape with his life. The giant beast's combat power shocked and terrified him. Just its physical strength alone was so terrifying that he could not resist at all. How terrifying would its law ability be? He did not think that the giant beast only had physical strength and did not have offensive law ability. Not only did it have it, but it was also very likely that it had many of them. 5 laws, or even more. Conservatively, Gray felt that the giant beast had at least 5 law ability, or even more. He had seen a blood fiend with 3 laws before. Although it was powerful, it was not as if he could not put up a fight. Although a blood fiend with 4 laws was stronger than a blood fiend with 3 laws, it was definitely not much stronger. However, this giant beast's physical strength alone had reached such a terrifying level. Therefore, Gray guessed that it was at least a blood fiend with 5 laws. Whoosh! Looking in the direction of the giant beast with lingering fear, Gray teleported away without hesitation. He left the endless ocean and returned to the mainland. The depths of the endless ocean were too dangerous. His encounter with this giant beast made him deeply aware of this point. If he did not have the ability to teleport, it was very likely that he would have died under the giant claw of this giant beast. In the face of such unstoppable power, even a veteran law powerhouse was just a strong ant. It was no wonder that so many law powerhouses who did not have much time left entered the endless ocean and never returned. He had gained enough from entering the endless ocean this time. Therefore, he made a prompt decision to give up exploring the endless ocean and return to the mainland. After passing by the island with the earth vein fruit, Gray checked the situation of the fruit and found that it would take at least half a year for it to ripen. After that, he teleported a few times and returned to the mainland. Pata! Stepping on the land of the continent, Gray felt a sense of security in his heart. His nerves that had been tense during this period of time relaxed. Compared to the endless ocean where there were countless law blood fiends, and there were even some extremely terrifying law blood fiends, the mainland was simply a paradise. Lord Gray. Gray summoned Saint Luofu and the Earth Holy Temple's temple master from space. The two of them bowed respectfully to Gray. Return to your respective factions and use your faction's intelligence network to search for information on law-type magic herbs. That's right. Also, find blood fiends with the law of eyes or blood fiend's blood. Gray nodded slightly. After thinking for a while, he instructed, "Yes." The two of them replied respectfully. After confirming that Gray had no other instructions, they turned and left. Looking in the direction the two of them left, Gray summoned Ingba and Alan, teleported to a city, and walked into a high-end restaurant. After being on the sea for several months, he needed to do something that could ease his nerves. Delicacies were clearly one of the things that could ease his nerves. The three of them had a big meal and then stayed in a high-end tavern, booking the most luxurious room. Lying on the soft leather sofa in the high-end tavern room, Gray's nerves slowly dispersed. The reason he stayed in this space-time was to use this space-time as a buffer to accumulate strength, to accumulate enough strength to contend against Saint Koro. His actions during this period of time were also for this purpose, and he would continue to do so. The earth vein fruit would take half a year to ripen. Relying on the earth vein fruit to increase his strength would take at least half a year. Apart from the earth vein fruit, the other way to increase his strength quickly was to increase his law ability. Currently, he had the law of time, space, puppetry, and curse. However, this was not the upper limit of the law ability he could possess. According to his deduction, every 5 out of the 35 types of law ability would form a law ability. The limit of the law ability that each person could grasp should be 7. Now that he had mastered 4 law abilities, he was far from reaching the limit. For other law powerhouses, increasing the number of law abilities was very difficult and dangerous. However, for Gray, it was not too difficult. He only needed to consume the blood of various law blood beasts. However, he could not consume them blindly. His body could only withstand a limited number of transformations. He could not consume the blood of law blood beasts whenever he saw one. He needed to conduct an efficient screening. Thinking of a suitable law ability, Gray could not help but think of Saint Koro. The other party had targeted him because his law ability could complement his law ability. On the other hand, the other party's law ability was also suitable for him. The other party's law of plunder was made up of an unknown ability, and he was not sure if it was suitable for him. However, the other party's law of eye was definitely suitable for him. He had already confirmed this point from the previous Sacred Eye Clan powerhouse. This was also the reason why he had ordered the Earth Holy Temple and Silver Holy Temple to search for blood beasts or blood of the Law of Eye. After resting and relaxing in the city for a few days, Gray immersed himself in comprehending the law of puppetry. The law of puppetry was a law ability with great potential. The law itself did not have any offensive abilities, but the puppets it controlled had offensive abilities. The strength of this offensive ability was related to the strength of the puppets. The strength of the puppets when they were alive would be the strength of the puppets after they were controlled. If he could kill the terrifying giant beast he had encountered a few days ago and control it, he was confident that he could fight against Saint Koro. Of course, this was just a thought. That kind of giant beast was not something he could kill. When encountering such a giant beast, the only choice was to escape. To a certain extent, the law of puppetry was extremely similar to the law of refining. It also did not have any offensive abilities and could only create things with offensive abilities. The law of puppetry could create powerful puppets, while the law of refining could refine powerful weapons. Buzz, like spinning silk from a cocoon, Gray explored the various mysteries of the law of puppetry and understood this law ability. Without the assistance of precious magic herbs such as the law fruit, and without the help of the corresponding law book, the speed of comprehension was not very fast, even with the supermemory ability. At this speed, Gray estimated that he would need at least 100 years to completely comprehend the law of puppetry. To Gray, this was an extremely long time. The time he had spent cultivating up until now was not even half of this time. Even so, this time was still inconceivable to most Law Realm powerhouses. Ordinary Law Realm powerhouses would need at least 1,000 years to completely comprehend a law. Even some Law Realm powerhouses with extremely strong comprehension abilities would need several hundred years. 100 years was an inconceivable time for Law Realm powerhouses. Unknowingly, half a year had passed. Gray ended his comprehension of the law and left the plane. According to his estimation, the Earth Vein fruit was about to ripen. Although a veteran Law Realm powerhouse like St. Walter was guarding it, and it was unlikely that anything would happen, he still wanted to personally guard it to ensure that nothing would go wrong. Whoa! In a huge city with a population of over 10 million, a wolf's howl suddenly resounded through the world. Following that, a terrifying chill burst out like rolling waves that could topple mountains and overturn seas. It covered the sky and the earth, and quickly covered the entire city. Everything was frozen. Regardless of whether it was buildings, plants, or even people, everything was frozen by this terrifying chill and turned into ice sculptures. In an instant, this huge city with a population of over 10 million turned into a world of ice and snow. 15_15674/ Chapter 839. Lord Gray. With a few teleportations, Gray brought Ba and Alan to the island with the Earth Vein fruit. Walter Saint, who had received Gray's order, waved the others away and hurried over. How long will it take for it to ripen? Gray asked. More than a month. St. Walter replied respectfully and then said, Yes. Lord Gray, I wasn't able to contact you some time ago because you were in the plane. There's news about the blood of the blood beast with the Law of Eyes that you're looking for. Oh, there's news. Which faction has it? Gray was overjoyed. There was really good news coming one after another. The Earth Vein fruit would ripen in a month at most, and now there was news about the blood of the blood beast with the Law of Eyes. These two pieces of news were absolutely good news for him. It's in the hands of the Order Temple. Walter Saint replied. You didn't send anyone to exchange for it? Gray looked at Walter Saint with some doubt. The Earth Temple should have received the news for some time. Logically speaking, they should have already exchanged for it by now. I've already sent someone to exchange for it, but they didn't manage to do so. The blood of the blood beast with the Law of Eyes is one of the trading items that the Order Temple prepared for the Holy Trade Meeting. They don't intend to exchange it now. But don't worry, Lord. The Earth Temple has already sent someone to the trade meeting. They will definitely be able to exchange for the blood of the blood beast with the Law of Eyes. Holy Trade Meeting? What's the Holy Trade Meeting? Gray nodded and asked curiously. It's a barter trade meeting organized by a saint-level faction. It's usually held once every 100 years. This time, it's organized by the Order Temple. Organized by a saint-level faction? Gray couldn't help but be interested when he heard that it was organized by a saint-level faction. Are there many saint-level factions participating? Because it's organized by a saint-level faction, there are many items that are useful to saint-level factions. Therefore, every time it's organized, half of the saint-level factions in the origin world will send people. Some saint-level factions will even send saint-level experts. Walter Saint said, with some yearning, if he didn't need to protect the earth vein fruit, he was prepared to go and see if he could exchange for the items he needed from other saint-level experts. When does it start? Half a month later. Half a month? There's still time. Gray immediately decided to go. He had a lot of valuable things that he could not use. He might be able to exchange these things for useful things at the sacred trade meeting. However, the earth vein fruit. Looking in the direction of the earth vein fruit, Gray raised his eyebrows slightly, but soon relaxed. The plane opened, and 4 blood beasts of laws walked out and appeared on the island. One of them was a huge silver dragon. One was a giant bird covered in golden feathers that looked like an eagle. One was a huge, colorful spider. One of them was a giant beast with a single horn and striped patterns all over its body. The aura of the rule blood beasts permeated the air. Both humans and beasts on the island felt a terrifying pressure descend upon them, as if the end of the world had arrived. Each of the 4 nomological blood beasts had combat strength comparable to a veteran nomological powerhouse. With the 4 of them working together, any veteran nomological powerhouse would not be able to return. Even a 3 nomological powerhouse would be able to hold on for a while until he rushed back. With the protection of St. Walter and these 4 nomological blood beasts, he could go to the sacred trade meeting without worry. Originally, he had even prepared to place the Crimson Behemoth here to guard the earth vein fruit, but considering that he might need the Crimson Behemoth's ability on this trip to the sacred trade meeting, he gave up on this idea. 10 days later, Gray arrived at a giant city with Ingba and Alan. This was a huge city. The city walls were 100 meters tall and seemed to have been directly created with ability. There was not the slightest gap. It stretched for dozens of miles. From afar, it looked like a giant mountain lying on the ground. The huge city gate was made of many metals. With Gray's metal ability, he could even feel the fluctuations of heritage weapons. And there was a lot of them. Conservatively speaking, there was enough metal to make dozens of heritage weapons that had been integrated into the metal gate. Whether it was the city wall or the metal gate, there were many patterns on the surface. They were part of some kind of giant runic array. If activated, it would definitely be able to transform into a huge defensive barrier that even nomological powerhouses would find difficult to break. It should also have offensive abilities. After entering the city, they saw a huge passageway that could accommodate 10 carriages side by side. On both sides of the passageway were neatly arranged pointed buildings. On the streets, carriages shuttled back and forth. There are not only carriages pulled by horses, but also carriages pulled by all kinds of blood beasts. Although there were blood beasts, they did not cause a commotion. These blood beasts were all tamed, and their auras were all restrained. They would not scare the crowd and horses. The trading location of the sacred trade meeting was at the orderly sacred palace in the center of the city. However, Gray did not go there immediately. There were still 5 days before the trade meeting began. Before that, he needed to find an inn to stay in. Of course, if he could reveal his identity as a nomological powerhouse, he would definitely be welcomed into the orderly sacred palace. However, he did not intend to do so. After looking at several inns, Gray and the other 2 finally found a place to stay. There were too many people entering the city at this time. Although the sacred trade meeting was organized by a Saint rank faction and more than half of the Saint rank factions were participating, in reality, the main participants were still top-tier factions. Compared to the scarcity of Saint rank factions, there were too many top-tier factions. After settling down in the inn, Gray and the other 2 went downstairs to eat. In the dining hall, Gray saw at least a dozen groups that were likely to be participating in the sacred trade meeting. There were groups made up entirely of young people, and there were also groups made up of seniors and juniors. There was also a group that clearly seemed to have servants. Among them, the noisiest group was none other than the group of young people. Without the control of their seniors, these young people were like runaway horses, chattering nonstop. At the table next to Gray and the other 2 was a group made up of 5 young men and women. "Elder sister, you're so beautiful." Among the 5, There was a young woman wearing a red combat suit. She looked above average and had a rather cheerful personality. As soon as Gray and the other two sat down, she moved closer to Ingba and greeted her naturally and generously. She was not shy at all. "Thank you." Ingba responded politely, her voice obviously distant, but she didn't seem to notice it and instead kept talking nonstop. One moment she said the color of Ingba's hair was so beautiful. The next she said Ingba's skin was so white and what skincare serum she used. It wasn't until a young man next to her rubbing his temples came over and forcibly pulled her back to her seat that she finally stopped. The young man looked somewhat similar to the young woman. He looked at Ingba with a slightly stunned expression and said apologetically, "Sorry, my sister has caused trouble for you." "It's fine." Ingba shook her head and didn't say anything more. Seeing this, the latter smiled awkwardly and returned to his seat. Before leaving, he glanced at Gray, who was sitting at the same table as Ingba with a slightly envious look. Originally, he wanted to take the opportunity to talk to Ingba, but unfortunately, Ingba's coldness was beyond his expectations. There was a temperament that kept people at arm's length, and with just 2 words, all the words that had been brewing in his heart were all blocked back. He didn't even have a chance to talk to Ingba, but Gray was able to sit together with her. This kind of treatment immediately made him envious of Gray. Gray glanced at the young man and didn't pay any more attention to him. During this time, he had seen many people like this. As a former holy maiden, Ingba's coldness was innate, and trying to strike up a conversation with her was doomed to be futile. At this time, all his attention was focused on the table where 3 middle-aged men were sitting. How tragic! More than 10 million people died, just like that. A middle-aged man with a small beard exclaimed with a look of amazement on his face. "That's right, more than 10 million people. That's more than 10 million people we're talking about." Another middle-aged man with a white face and beard also said, "What's going on? Were they destroyed by an enemy?" The other middle-aged man with a beard asked in surprise. "I don't know. There were no survivors in the entire city. Everyone seemed to have been turned into ice sculptures in an instant." It wasn't until the next day that a caravan arrived that they discovered it, but one thing is certain, it was a saint. A saint? The 3 men's faces turned solemn. Such an existence was unattainable to them, and it was a great honor for them to be able to meet one. The Ice Temple also has a saint, but where is the saint? I don't know. The cold air froze the entire city and condensed in the city without dissipating. I heard that even major figures would be in danger if they went in. Currently, the entire city has been sealed off by several saint forces, and they're waiting for the cold air to dissipate before entering to search. What I've heard is somewhat different from what you've heard. As far as I know, the saints from several saint forces have already entered to investigate before this. What was the result? The other 2 men hurriedly asked. That saint retreated with his entire body covered in ice, and his injuries were not light. He left on the spot. Not long after, several saint forces jointly issued a lockdown order, and the entire city was sealed off. Chapter 840. The Ice Temple was actually destroyed? Gray was shocked as he digested the news. His heart was full of shock. Ice Temple was one of the sacred factions in the north of the Source World. He had heard of this sacred faction before. This sacred faction, even among the surrounding sacred factions, was known for being strong. According to the rumors, the sacred faction's current sacred was a 3-rule elite. That was impossible to prove. After all, rule-level battles usually happened in places where people rarely went. Very few outsiders knew about them. But there was no smoke without fire. Even if the rumors about a 3-rule elite were a bit exaggerated, he must have been a top existence among the old rule elites. His battle power should not have been too far off from the rumors. However, such a saint-level force had actually been destroyed. More than 10 million people in the Holy City had all died. After such a big thing had happened, the Sacred of Ice Temple still had not shown up. It was very likely that he had died along with Ice Temple. Could it be a powerhouse with 3 laws? To be able to destroy the Ice Temple and even kill the Ice Temple Saint, it would either require the joint efforts of many veteran experts of the laws or an expert of 3 laws. According to the 3 of them, there were no signs of a big battle in Sacred City. The people who had died were all frozen in an instant. It did not look like they had been surrounded. It looked like they had been killed in a very short amount of time by an absolute power. So, he guessed it was a three-rule elite. There are not many sacred factions with three-rule elites. Which faction was it? A thoughtful look appeared in Gray's eyes. Sacred factions were rare. Even if all the sacred factions in the source world were added together, there were only a few dozen of them. Sacred factions with three-rule elites were even rarer. There were only a few of them. The sacred faction that destroyed Ice Temple might have been one of those factions. Of course, there were some sacred factions that hid very well. They had three-rule elites, but they did not reveal them. 5 days later, the sacred trade fair began. Gray took Ing 8 and Alan to a carriage. They arrived outside of the Order Holy Palace. As a trade fair held by a sacred faction, the standards were not low. Not just any faction was allowed to enter. All the teams that participated had to be led by an Annihilation elite. After Shadow 8 revealed an Annihilation class presence, Gray and the others were able to enter. They were led to a giant plaza by the students of the Order Holy Palace. In a huge square paved with lapis lazuli, there were stone tables and chairs. Judging from the traces, it should have been created by the Order Temple recently. At this moment, there were already many people in the square. Some people sat on stone chairs and placed items on the stone table next to them. When the people around them saw this, they would gather around to check and discuss a deal. Gray scanned the entire square and found that there were many miscellaneous things on the stone table. There were metal ores, magic herbs, magic weapons, magic potions, but without exception, they were all things with high values that were difficult to measure in terms of magic coins. In addition to this square, there were many courtyards on one side of the square. Judging from the attire of the people entering and exiting the courtyards seemed to be of a higher standard than the square. With Shadow 8 and Alan, Gray passed by one stone table after another, looking for things that could be of use. Unfortunately, with his current level, the things that could be of use to him were too precious. It was not easy to find them. After passing by a dozen stone tables, Gray stopped at a stone table. On the stone table, there were several types of magic herbs stored in transparent crystal containers for trading. One of the magic herbs was a green fruit. The green fruit was about the size of a baby's fist. It was round in shape, and its sides were slightly concave. It was green in color, and it looked like an unripe fruit. However, the truth was that this fruit had already matured, and its appearance after maturing was like this. Evolution fruit. Seeing this fruit, Gray did not say anything, but Alan had already recognized it. Gray had a lot of books. Alan spent most of his time in the plane. In his spare time, he developed the habit of reading, so his knowledge was far beyond his peers. How do I exchange this evolution fruit? There was an ordinary-looking middle-aged man sitting by the stone table. Gray looked at him and asked. This fruit was the one that caused the king of mercenaries and the king of assassins to fight over. It could promote bloodline evolution. This fruit was naturally useless to him now, and it was even useless to Shadow 8. However, it was very useful to Alan. One fruit was enough to raise Alan's bloodline to the king level, saving him the trouble of transplanting his bloodline. Moreover, there was an advantage to using the evolution fruit to promote bloodline evolution. It was the most compatible with the body and could increase the cultivation speed to a certain extent. Many disciples of top forces used this method to promote their bloodline. Gray did not have such a fruit. He was going to ask for it from the Temple of the Earth, but since he encountered it, he might as well exchange for it. 1 level 4 support cultivation medicine. The middle-aged man glanced at Gray and said, "Is the blood dragon medicine okay?" "Yes." After exchanging for the evolution fruit, the three of them walked to the other stone tables. After walking around the plaza, they did not find anything else that caught their eye. The three of them walked to the courtyards one after another. In the courtyards, there were many stone tables, but they were very sparse. They were not as crowded as the plaza. The value of the items on the stone tables was obviously higher than the ones in the plaza. The people guarding the items had an Annihilation class presence. They were Annihilation class elites. The three of them walked through one courtyard after another. They saw many good items. There were metals that could be used to create heritage weapons. After entering a courtyard, Gray and the other two's eyes were attracted to a stone table in the middle of the courtyard. Around the stone table, there were a dozen people. It was very eye-catching. The three of them walked over and immediately understood why. On the stone table, there were many magic potions. There was even a precious level 6 attribute change potion. That was enough to raise an Annihilation class elite's level. It was no wonder so many people were paying attention to it. Beside the stone table was an old woman. The old woman's outermost clothing was a medicine maker's robe. Judging from the level 6 attribute change potions on the stone table, she was probably a level 6 potion master. A level 6 potion master. Aside from the legendary level 7 potion master, she was at the pinnacle of potion masters. To someone like that, even a holy faction would treat them with respect. How do I exchange for this wind element transformation potion? Gray's eyes skipped over the potions that were level 6 and below. He glanced at the few level 6 potions that were on the table. In the end, his eyes landed on the wind element transformation potion. Now that he was a rule elite, he did not need the wind element transformation potion. Shadow 8, however, could use it. Shadow 8's level had reached the 3rd level of Annihilation class. Now, he was transforming into a wind element. The old woman looked at Gray. She doubted Gray's purchasing power. After all, Gray and the other two were too young. Their youthfulness could be determined by their presence. Since someone had asked, she answered, "A level 6 fire element magic potion. I'll trade." Gray took out a wooden box from his space item. He opened the wooden box. It was around 10 centimeters long. The leaves were blue, and the shape of the potion was like a burning flame. In the endless ocean, Gray had obtained a dozen level 6 magic potions. This potion was one of the fire element magic potions. Blue flame grass? Sure. The old woman looked at the potion in the wooden box. With her identity as a potion master, she could easily tell that the potion was a level 6 fire element magic potion. The potion was well preserved. Although it was strange that Gray could take out such a precious level 6 fire element magic potion, she only cared about whether or not he could take out a level 6 fire element magic potion. She did not care who he was, so she agreed to the trade. He can take out a level 6 magic potion? Who is this person? Most of the people around wanted level 6 magic potion, but they could not take out a level 6 magic potion to trade. Seeing Gray take out a level 6 magic potion to trade, they could not help but look at Gray with curiosity. When they first saw Gray and the other two, they could not help but look at Ingba. Ingba's appearance and presence were too eye-catching. Now they all looked at Gray. They had guessed that the person with the highest status among the three was this young man. "Excuse me." After looking around the yard and not finding anything else of interest, Gray and the other two walked out of the yard. Just walking to the gate of the yard, an old man holding a wooden box came quickly. Seeing Gray and the other two blocking the way, the other side pushed Gray and the other two slightly rudely and walked into the yard. Gray and the other two took a look at the old man and did not say much. They continued to walk out of the yard. The old man was holding the wooden box and went straight to the stone table where the potion was placed. He said to the old woman beside the stone table, "I want to change the wind element metamorphosis potion. It's gone. The one just now has been replaced." The old woman did not take the wooden box, but shook her head. When the other party left, he did not say that he would keep the wind element metamorphosis potion for him. So after seeing that someone could take out the magic potion she needed, she immediately agreed to the trade. "By whom?" the old man asked with some anger. Hearing the old man's angry voice, the onlookers could not help but look at Gray and the other two at the gate of the yard, and the old man's eyes also followed the onlookers' eyes. The latest chapter of Blood Ability Warrior came to the website. Chapter 841. U3, the Wind Element Metamorphosis Potion is very useful to me. Can you let me have the Wind Element Metamorphosis Potion? Seeing Gray and the other two ready to leave, the old man did not think much. He walked past Gray and the other two and stopped Gray and the other two. He was an elder of the Storm Temple. He was a 5th-tier Annihilation class being. He only needed one more step to become a big shot in the Storm Temple. His only remaining element was wind. Seeing the wind element metamorphosis potion, he was overjoyed. He wanted to trade for it, but the other person wanted a 6-tier fire element mana potion. He did not have it. A 6-tier potion master was someone he did not dare offend, even if he was an elder of a holy class faction. He had to borrow it from other elders. Now, he finally had the 6-tier fire element mana potion. He did not expect the wind element metamorphosis potion to be taken by someone else. That was his hope of becoming a big shot. He did not think much about it and stopped Gray and the other two. I am sorry. This wind element metamorphosis potion is very useful to us. Having been blocked twice, Gray raised his eyebrows, but he did not do anything. He shook his head and refused. You three, I am an elder of the Storm Temple. Please give me some face. The old man stated his identity. He had calmed down a bit. If someone could take out a 6-tier fire element mana potion, their identity would not be simple. But the wind element metamorphosis potion was very important to him. If he missed it, he did not know when he would get another chance. He did not want to give it up. I am sorry. This wind element metamorphosis potion is very useful to us. Gray shook his head. Did the elder of a holy class faction have a lot of face? From the perspective of normal factions, that was the case. Even the most powerful families would give him some face. After all, the elder had a holy class faction behind him. Unfortunately, the elder's face did not mean anything to Gray. He was just an elder. He was not even a big shot. Even if he was a big shot, he did not have a right to make him give face. Only rule elites had that right. Young man, are you really not going to give me face? The old man's face turned cold. He thought he had been polite enough, but Han's son still did not give him any face. It made him angry. Do you have a lot of face? Gray's voice was also slightly cold. He had already rejected him very clearly, but the other party was still pestering him, which made him a little impatient. He believed that his personality was already good enough. If it was not him, but another powerhouse of laws, they would have long since crushed the other party with a single finger. So many good things. What's going on over there? Are the three of them arguing with someone? Along with the voice, the 5 young men and women whom Gray's group had met at the inn a few days ago were walking towards the courtyard. They immediately saw Gray's group standing at the entrance to the courtyard. The 5 of them quickly approached and immediately saw the old man who was arguing with Gray with his back facing them. It's Elder Tyro from the Storm Temple. This is bad. The 3 of them are actually fighting with Elder Tyler. The 5 of them came from a powerful family in the Storm Territory. The family had dealings with many elders of the Storm Temple. One of them was Elder Tyler. As far as they knew, Elder Tyler's status in the Storm Temple was extremely high, second only to the giants. Every time he came, he would be personally accompanied by the patriarch of their family. After all, we know the 3 of them. We can't just stand by and watch. Let me try. Among the 5 of them, the young man who had spoken to Embark glanced at Ingba. After a little hesitation, he stepped forward and said to the old man with a smile on his face, "Greetings, Elder Tyler. I am a disciple of the Shao Air family, whom you've met before. These 3 are my friends. If they have done anything wrong, I apologize on their behalf. Please don't be calculative with them for the sake of the Shao Air family." Scram. Hearing the young man's words, especially when he heard the word face, the old man, Tyler, who had just been questioned by Gray, turned his head and yelled angrily, "Do you think you have a lot of face?" Scram before I change my mind. If it was any other time, he wouldn't mind giving some face to the other party's family. After all, the other party's family was a powerful family and would be useful in the future. However, now that it was related to the opportunity to become a giant, let alone a child of a powerful family, even if the other party was an elder of a powerful family, he wouldn't give face. Being scolded by the old man and feeling the strange gazes around him, the young man's face turned green and red. He originally wanted to help Ingba out in order to gain Ingba's gratitude and goodwill, but he didn't expect Elder Tyler to not give him any face at all. He was a member of a powerful family, but the other party didn't give him any face at all. He was extremely angry and sullen in his heart, but he didn't dare to do anything. He could only retreat with a pale face. Young man, don't you think you're too arrogant? After scolding the young man, Elder Tyler looked at Gray again, his eyes cold. Too arrogant? I don't think so. Gray shook his head. If other Law Realm powerhouses encountered this situation, they would definitely be even more arrogant. Good, very good. After living for so long, this is the first time I've met such an arrogant young man. Elder Tyler's eyes turned even colder. Do you think I can't do anything to you just because this is the Order Holy Palace? If you don't want to die, get out of my way. Hearing the other party's threat, Gray was already a little impatient and said coldly, You have a death wish. Elder Tyler's face turned green. The presence of an Annihilation class elite exploded. The air felt like it was filled with lead. He was only one step away from becoming an Annihilation class elite. It made many people's faces turn pale. Today, I'm going to break your legs and teach you a lesson on behalf of your elders, who is causing trouble in the Order Holy Palace. At this time, a middle-aged man was being led by a young man. He noticed something was wrong. The young man who was in charge of this place knew he couldn't do anything about it, so he reported it to the nearest elder. Huh? Mr. Tyler, what is going on? Who has made you so angry? Seeing Elder Tyler, the middle-aged man raised his eyebrows. A few days before the trade fair started, the elders and disciples of the various holy palaces stayed in the Order Holy Palace. So, he recognized the old man immediately. Elder Richard, this man insulted the Storm Holy Palace. If we don't teach him a lesson, the Storm Holy Palace will lose face. Please do us a favor. Seeing the arrival of the Order Temple Elder, the old man Taylor had an idea. Putting a big hat on Gray's head, he put himself on the moral high ground and said righteously. The middle-aged man, Richard, hesitated. Fighting was forbidden at the trade fair, but since it involved the reputation of a holy faction, it was difficult to stop it. Otherwise, the Order Holy Palace might become enemies with a holy faction. Of course, he understood that no one would be stupid enough to insult a holy faction. There had to be some exaggeration. But this was the face of an elder from a holy faction, and he was also a leader candidate. He had to show some respect. He wanted to agree immediately, but before he did, he subconsciously looked at Gray and the other two. He wanted to see who had offended them. With this glance, his gaze suddenly froze. In the next moment, with a respectful expression on his face, he quickly stepped forward to greet him. Sir, you know me? Looking at the middle-aged man, Richard, who was standing respectfully in front of him, Gray asked. Yes, sir's crystal projection. The middle-aged man, Richard, quickly replied. In order to hold a trade fair, the Order Holy Palace sent out invitations to all the holy factions in the Origin world. Among them, although Gray was not from a holy faction, he was also one of the invitations because of his strength as a law powerhouse. However, Gray did not have a fixed residence, so the invitation was not sent out in the end. Although they were unable to send it out, the Order's Sacred Hall was aware of the existence of such an expert of the laws. In particular, an elder in charge of the Holy Trade Association like him had seen Gray's crystal projection. Elder Richard, seeing the middle-aged man's polite attitude towards Gray, the old man, Tyler, felt that something was wrong. Ignoring Tyler's greeting, the middle-aged man looked at Gray, asking for Gray's opinion. You want to break my legs? Gray coldly looked at the old man, Tyler. There was no terrifying aura coming from him, but because of Richard's courteous attitude towards Gray, the old man felt a chill in his heart, and cold air kept flowing into his body. The old man, Tyler, felt a chill in his heart and subconsciously retreated. However, before he could do anything, a cold light flashed, and he was horrified to find that his body was falling to the ground uncontrollably. Thud! He fell to the ground pathetically, and pain came from his legs. He hurriedly looked at his legs, and his face was filled with anger, shock, and fear. My legs. He saw that his legs had been cut off from his thighs. The cut was encased in ice, and not a drop of blood came out. It was like a smooth mirror. His legs had been cut off, which made him very angry. At the same time, it made him very shocked and scared. As a fifth-tier Annihilation elite, He did not even have time to react before his legs were cut off. It was unbelievable. Even Annihilation class giant would not have been able to do it so easily, but Han's son had done it. The power Han's son displayed shocked and scared him. Han's son might have been cold sweat kept coming out. At this moment, he finally understood why the middle-aged man, Richard, had behaved the way he did. Mr. The trade fair between the holy class factions is in the innermost yard. Shall I lead the way? The middle-aged man, Richard, asked with a respectful expression. Seeing Gray cut off the old man, Tyler's legs, he looked down as if he did not see anything. He did not mention the trade fair's rule that forbade fighting. Only the weak had to follow the rules. The strong had the right to break the rules. The man in front of him had the right to do so. Plus, from what he could see, the old man, Tyler, was very lucky to be alive. If it had been any other rule elite, they would not have been able to survive. Yes, lead the way. Gray nodded. The items being traded outside were not very useful to him. If he wanted to find something useful, he would have to go to the trade fair between the holy class factions. Chapter 842. Who is he? Seeing Gray and the other two leave under the respectful guidance of the elder of the Order Holy Palace, the young man who wanted to help Gray and the other two to win Shadow 8's favor was frozen. It took him a while to recover. What he saw was a miraculous turn of events. He had gone to help the three of them, but he had been yelled at by the old man Tyler. He felt humiliated, but after he came back, he calmed down. He understood that Gray and the other two must have angered the old man Tyler. That was why he was not being nice to him, a member of a very powerful family, enraging an elder of a Saint-class organization, and one who was also a potential hegemon at that. He had already sentenced Gray and the other two to death in his heart. This time, even if they didn't die, they would most likely lose a layer of skin. He did not expect things to turn around. The Order Holy Palace elder did not help the old man Tyler, who was also an elder of a holy faction. Instead, he was very polite to the young man among the three of them. After that, the young man among the three of them showed his power. He cut off the old man Tyler's legs and left under the respectful guidance of the Order Holy Palace elder. It does not matter who he is. Brother, you do not need to think about it. Among the five, a young woman in a red female battle suit shrugged and said. Her brother's thoughts were written all over his face. Even someone as slow as her could tell what he was thinking. Obviously, her brother was not as good as that young man. He had no chance. It was not just the woman. Even she could not help but be attracted by the young man's mysterious presence. Her heart was beating fast. She could not help but think that it would be great if she could meet him again. I thought the Holy Trade Association forbade fighting. How dare he fight? And that Order Holy Palace elder, why didn't he stop him? You're focusing on the wrong thing. The important thing is his power. Because of the conflict just now, many people from various forces had gathered in the vicinity of this courtyard. Seeing Gray cut off the Storm Temple's elder's legs and leave, many people looked at each other in dismay. What do you mean? I know the man whose legs were cut off. He is Annihilation Tier 5 Elder of the Storm Holy Palace. To be able to cut off his legs, that young man must be very powerful. An Annihilation class big shot? I think so. At such a young age, he became an Annihilation class giant? Similar conversations continued to ring out. Many people sucked in a breath of cold air. They were amazed that Gray had such strength at such a young age. Most of them might not be able to reach that level in their entire lives. Elder Minnie, what's wrong? Among these people, there was a team of 7, and the surrounding people were faintly distancing themselves from them. These 7 people wore green oak patterns on their clothes, the symbol of the plant temple. Among the 7 people, a young woman with a pretty face looked doubtfully at the elder who had been silent since the beginning. Do not provoke this young man. The captain, old Minnie, regained her senses when she heard the question. Her face was still filled with shock as she warned him seriously. We understand. The young woman and the other young people all nodded. They naturally wouldn't foolishly provoke a big shot. The Storm Temple is still so overbearing. But this time, they have encountered a hard nail. However, this person has cut off the legs of an elder of the Storm Temple. The Storm Temple will definitely not let this matter go. I'm afraid this person will suffer. The young woman wrinkled her nose and said, The Storm Temple will not benefit from this. The old woman, Minnie, shook her head. After offending such a person, even the Storm Temple could only grit their teeth and admit that they were unlucky. Why? The young woman looked at the old woman, Minnie, with confusion. The old woman, Minnie, hesitated and whispered something into the young woman's ear. What? He is? The young woman's eyes widened as she exclaimed. She quickly covered her mouth with her hand and looked at the old woman, Minnie, in shock. It's good that you know. Don't tell anyone else. Otherwise, that person will be unhappy. The old woman, Minnie, said seriously. I understand. The young woman's heart was filled with shock. She nodded subconsciously like a chick pecking at rice. Elder Tyler, your legs? What happened? Who cut off your legs? Not long after, the elders and disciples of the Storm Temple who had heard the news arrived. When they saw the old man, Tyler's injuries, they were both shocked and angry. Elder Tyler, who did it? An elder asked as he clenched his fist. We'll talk about it when we get back. The old man, Tyler, was sweating profusely. He was in pain, and he was scared. He shook his head and spoke with a pale face. Under the guidance of the middle-aged man, Richard, Gray, and Minnie passed through a few courtyards. Finally, they entered a large courtyard that was guarded by an Annihilation elite. After passing through the courtyard's garden, they finally came to a meeting room. They knocked on the door, and a voice came from inside. The middle-aged man, Richard, and Gray pushed open the door and walked in. In the middle of a huge conference room, there was a huge long table with two curved ends. Around the long table, there were more than 40 people standing or sitting. Master Oga, this is Saint Gray. The middle-aged man, Richard, came to the old woman, who was sitting at one end of the table. He introduced Gray to the old woman. After hearing Gray's identity, the old woman looked at Gray with a bit of surprise. She quickly calmed down and extended her hand. Saint Gray, please sit. Gray nodded. He walked to the table, pulled out an empty chair, and sat down. Shadow 8 and Alan stood behind him. The people sitting there were either saints from Saint factions or hall leaders from Saint factions. The others, even Annihilation elites, could only stand. The two of them were no exception. Gray's arrival attracted the attention of all the Saint factions in the meeting room. Many pairs of eyes were looking at Gray. He did not reveal his presence, but the pressure of their gazes was enough to make an Annihilation elite break out in a cold sweat. This kind of pressure was nothing to Gray, who was an old rule elite. While these people were looking at Gray, Gray was also looking at them. Among them, he saw the Earth Holy Hall leader and Saint Luo Fu. There were also Basilica of the Holy Blood Saint Rudolph and Son Holy Hall Saint Ryan, who had some unpleasant experiences with him. In that case, let us continue the trade. Hall Leader Luo, it is your turn. The old woman coughed. She brought the trade between the Saint factions to the main topic. The one called Hall Leader Luo was a skinny old man. He took out a purple wooden box from a space item and opened it. Inside the wooden box, there was a 6-foot-long blood-colored plant. The blood-colored plant did not have any leaves. It had branches that looked like roots. It was so red that it looked like it was soaked in blood. It's suppressed bloodgrass. Seeing the item that Palace Lord Luo took out, someone let out a soft cry as he recognized the blood-colored plant. Gray's eyes also moved as he recognized it. Suppressed bloodgrass was a precious magic medicine that could suppress blood conflicts. It could increase the success rate of implanting blood. Its value was no less than land, pulse fruit, and rule fruit. It was also a level 7 magic medicine. Hall Leader Luo, what do you want to trade for? This kind of precious magic medicine that could prevent blood conflicts was very popular. Soon, a middle-aged woman, who was either a hall leader or a rule elite, asked, a magic plant that can help with rule comprehension. Hall Leader Luo said. He was not young. If he could not break through the rules, he would only have a few decades left. He was naturally unwilling to die. He had picked this suppressed bloodgrass in the depths of the Forbidden Forest many years ago. He had originally planned to use it after breaking through the rules. Now, he had no choice but to exchange it for resources to break through the rules. How about Bright Flower? The middle-aged woman took out a square wooden box from her space item and opened it. A white gold flower, emitting a hazy white light, was revealed. Bright flower. Hall leader Loo hesitated. Although all magic medicine had the effect of comprehending the rules, the same magic medicine had different effects on different rules. For example, the bright flower was most suitable for comprehending the rules of light. The earth pulse fruit was most suitable for comprehending the rules of earth. As for the rule fruit, it was effective on all kinds of rules. However, the effect was not as strong as the magic medicine with high compatibility. The bright flower had a poor compatibility with the rules on his body, so he hesitated. I will trade with wind thundergrass. This magic medicine should have a good compatibility with you. Do you want to trade? A man said, yes. Hall leader Loo nodded without hesitation. Among the magic medicine he had wind and lightning attributes. The compatibility with wind thundergrass was indeed excellent. It's my turn. My trade item is this holywood fruit. I want to trade for a magic medicine with fire attributes. After Hall leader Loo, an old man smiled and took out a wooden box. He opened it and revealed a green diamond-shaped fruit. I will trade with fire pulse fruit. Deal. The people sitting around the long table took out their items one after another. Each item was enough to move Gray's heart. He was so envious that he wanted to rob all of them. Of course, this was just a thought. Not to mention that this was not in line with his principles. Even if he threw away his principles, he would not be able to win against this group of people. Not to mention that there were 3 magic medicine powerhouses among them. Even if there were more than 10 of them, he would not be able to deal with them. These magic medicine powerhouses did not emit their aura. The reason he knew that there were more than 10 of them was because he asked St. Luo Fu in his mind. Your Excellency Gray, it's your turn. Soon, it was Gray's turn. After some consideration, Gray took out the bright metal. The bright metal was only the size of a fist and could not be refined into a magic weapon. In addition, he already had the Sun Sword, a magic weapon, and did not have much need for it. So he decided to trade with the bright metal. Chapter 843, Light Metal, and it's actually the size of a fist. The people present were all top figures of the various saint rank factions, and their vision was naturally extraordinary. Many of them recognized the metal in Gray's hand at a glance, and their eyes could not help but heat up. A law weapon was a peerless weapon in the hands of a law rank powerhouse. With it in hand, the power of a law rank powerhouse would skyrocket. Such a peerless weapon was naturally something that every saint rank faction wanted, so refining a law weapon became the goal of every saint rank faction. For this reason, every saint rank faction was doing their best to collect law medals. Seeing Gray take out the light medal, every saint rank faction could not help but be eager. What does Your Excellency Gray want to exchange for? A beautiful woman asked first. A law-type magic herb. I'll exchange it with a gold crystal fruit. What do you think, Your Excellency Gray? I'll offer a darkness fruit. I believe this fruit is more suitable for Your Excellency Gray. I don't think so. I think my soul fruit is more suitable for Your Excellency Gray. Moreover, I'll add 3 level 6 magic herbs. A total of 7 factions participated in the competition. Many of the factions that did not participate in the competition were also very envious, but they could not take out suitable items and could only reluctantly give up. In the end, Gray chose the soul fruit because it was a law-type magic herb that had a high compatibility with the law of puppets that he was currently comprehending. In addition, the other party very sincerely added 3 level 6 magic herbs. It could be said that they were very sincere. The trading continued, and after Gray, many Saint Rank factions took out items that they could not use for the time being to trade with other Saint Rank factions. Suddenly, Gray looked in a direction. As a law rank powerhouse, his senses were naturally very sharp. Just a moment ago, he felt a gaze on him, so he looked over. He saw 3 people standing behind an old man. One of them was a middle-aged man. After the middle-aged man glanced at Gray, he moved closer to the old man's ear and whispered something to the old man. When the old man heard his words, there was a trace of surprise on his face, and he also looked in Gray's direction. Who is that? Gray asked St. Luo Fu in his mind. That's Saint Huolei of the Star Temple. Saint Luofu's voice sounded in Gray's mind. Star Temple. Saint Huolei. Is he one of the people who has been proven to possess 3 laws? Gray felt a trace of fear in his heart. At the same time, he had a bad premonition. The way the two of them looked at him just now didn't seem to be as simple as sizing him up. One after another, Saint rank forces took out things that they couldn't use for the time being to trade. Finally, it was the Star Temple's turn to trade. With a wave of his hand, 3 wooden boxes appeared on the table in front of him. He opened them one by one. In the first wooden box, there was a blue plant that was more than 10 centimeters long and had flat round leaves. In the second wooden box, there was a purple crescent-shaped fruit. In the third wooden box, there was a piece of orange metal. It was about the same size as the radiant metal that Gray had obtained. Blood-dissolving grass, purple moon fruit, orange gold. Everyone present glanced over and immediately recognized the 3 items. Before the law rank, the implantation of a bloodline required the corresponding medicine to harmonize the blood essence. It was the same after the law rank. The blood-dissolving grass was a kind of magic herb that could harmonize the blood essence of law blood beasts. Its value wasn't lower than law-type magic herbs. The purple moon fruit was a law-type magic herb that leaned towards the soul. Finally, the orange gold was a kind of metal that could be used to refine law weapons. After opening the 3 items, Saint Horatio didn't state his conditions. Instead, he looked at Gray and said, "You're right. Your Excellency Gray, I plan to use these 3 items to trade for something with you." Designated trade? Seeing Saint Huolei take out 3 items and designate Gray to trade, the people from the various Saint rank forces were slightly surprised. Many of them had only vaguely heard of Gray before. They didn't understand what Gray had that was worth Saint Huolei taking out 3 items to trade. On the other hand, Saint Ryan of the Sacred Sun Temple sneered inwardly. He had already guessed what Saint Huolei wanted to trade for because he was the one who revealed the news to the Sacred Sun Temple. Sure enough, he's coming for me. Gray's brows furrowed imperceptibly, but he still spoke. Saint Huolei, what do you want to trade for? His Excellency Gray's law weapon. Saint Huolei's eyes burned with passion. When he found out that Gray didn't come to participate in this trade fair, he felt rather regretful. He thought that he could only find another opportunity to trade later. He didn't expect that Gray would appear in the middle of the trade fair. This made his heart burn with passion again. Law weapon? His Excellency Gray has a law weapon? Many Saint-level forces were shocked, and their faces were filled with shock. Saint-rank forces were rare, but law weapons were even rarer. This was because the materials were hard to find, and refining them was difficult. The law weapons of dozens of Saint-rank forces added together didn't exceed 10. Such a rare law weapon was actually in the hands of Gray, who wasn't from Saint-rank force. This surprised them. 3 things in exchange for a law weapon. After the initial shock, many people couldn't help but have strange expressions on their faces. Some looked at Gray with sympathy, while others looked at Gray as if they were watching a good show. A law weapon was worth at least 10 law mana herbs, and almost no Saint rank force was willing to trade for it. Saint Huolei was actually offering 3 things in exchange. This was bullying. Of course, this matter had nothing to do with them. They weren't familiar with Saint Gray before this. What they needed to do now was to observe the subsequent development of this matter as a bystander, and then make the decision that was in the best interest of the temple. Sorry, I'm not trading for this. Gray decisively refused. He naturally couldn't trade for a law weapon that could increase one's strength. Moreover, a piece of radiant metal was worth a law mana herb. The other side was offering something worth 3 law mana herbs. The price was clearly too low. Sir Gray, please reconsider. If you aren't satisfied with the terms of the trade, I can add a few more. Hearing Gray's refusal, Saint Huolei's voice became unyielding. No need. Gray's voice was a bit cold. Earlier, in the courtyard, an elder of a Saint rank force had wanted to force him to hand over the wind transformation potion, and now, a Saint of a Saint rank force wanted to trade for his law weapon. Recalling his experience in the original space-time, he couldn't help but sigh. Saint rank forces were always this arrogant in any space-time. But he could also understand. As existences standing at the peak of the pyramid, no force could suppress them. Over time, it was inevitable that they would become arrogant. Sir Gray, the Star Temple sincerely wants to trade with you. Are you sure you don't want to reconsider? Saint Hualei's voice was somewhat threatening. I've already made it very clear. Gray's expression turned cold as he coldly looked at Saint Hualei. All right, since Sir Gray insists. Saint Hualei's eyes flashed with a cold light, but he forcibly suppressed it. The law weapon was something he had to get. If he couldn't get it, he would snatch it. However, this was the Star Temple's territory, and there were many law powerhouses gathered here. If he made a move to snatch it now, it would be easy for other unforeseen events to occur. He decided to wait until the end of this trade fair and the other party was alone before making a move to snatch it. He believed that with his 3 laws, he could definitely snatch the law weapon. He's actually targeted by the Star Temple. Forget about making contact. The law powerhouses present were all shrewd existences, and many of them guessed Saint Hualei's plan. Originally, they had the idea of making contact with Gray after this. After all, a law powerhouse like Gray who didn't have a Saint rank force behind him was a very good target to rope in. But seeing that Gray was targeted by Saint Hualei, they immediately retreated. No Saint force would be willing to become enemies with a Saint force with 3 experts of laws. Even Saint forces with 3 experts of laws wouldn't be willing to offend a Saint force of the same level unless there were huge benefits to be gained. Due to the confrontation between Gray and Saint Hualei, the conference hall was silent for a while before someone finally spoke up to start the trade. Some people took out law-type mana herbs that didn't suit them. Some took out precious mana herbs that could increase their lifespan by several thousand years. And some took out refined law metals that could increase their strength beyond top-notch legacy weapons, but not reach the law grade. Half an hour later, every Saint-class organization had taken out their items for trade. Many Saint-rank forces were delighted to get what they wanted. Of course, there were also those who were disappointed because they didn't get what they wanted. Everyone looked at the old lady from the Order Temple, who was hosting this trade fair, and asked if today's trade would end here. They would wait for new Saint-rank forces to arrive in the next few days before resuming the trade. Faced with everyone's gazes, the old lady's gaze fell on Gray. Your Excellency Gray, the Star Temple wants to make a deal with you. What? The Stellar Temple has also taken a fancy to my law weapon? Gray's expression immediately turned cold, and his voice was slightly unfriendly. Your Excellency Gray, please don't misunderstand. The Star Temple has no intention of taking your law weapon. The old lady hurriedly shook her head. Then what kind of deal do you want to make? Gray's voice was slightly slower. Before that, I want to verify with Your Excellency Gray whether you can refine law weapons. The old lady looked at Gray cautiously. Why do you think so? Gray looked at the old lady with a sharp gaze. Although he had taken control of the Crimson Beast that could refine law weapons, and had thought of using the Crimson Beast ability to refine law weapons in exchange for resources from the various Saint-level factions, he had never mentioned how the other party knew about it. Chapter 844. Your Excellency Gray, please don't be agitated. My Order Temple hasn't spied on you, so please rest assured. I'm just speculating. Although I've never seen the law weapon in your hand, I've heard of it. It's completely different from existing law weapons, so I'm guessing that His Excellency Gray has just refined it. The old lady hurriedly explained before looking at Gray expectantly and nervously. Your Excellency Gray, I wonder if my speculation is true? At this moment, it wasn't just her. The various Saint-rank factions that had planned to leave also stopped, surprised by the old lady's speculation and looking expectantly and nervously at Gray. If Gray could really refine law weapons, it would be of great significance. The entire Origin world would be shaken by him. After all, that was a law weapon. That's right. I can refine law weapons. Gray nodded in acknowledgement. He had originally planned to use the law weapons to exchange for resources from the various Saint-rank factions. Since the other party had taken the initiative to ask, he might as well go with the flow and admit it. It's true. His Excellency Gray can really refine law weapons. So that's how His Excellency Gray got his law weapon. That's great. His Excellency Gray is actually a master refiner who can refine law weapons. The moment Gray nodded in acknowledgement, pairs of blazing eyes were cast on Gray, the heat in their gazes almost melting Gray. Master refiners who could refine grade 7 mana potions and master refiners who could refine law weapons were known as legends, but as saint rank factions, they knew that such people really existed. Master refiners who could refine grade 7 mana potions aside, if master refiners who could refine law weapons didn't exist, then how did the law weapons circulating in the world appear? As for how one could become a grade 7 master refiner or a master refiner who could refine law weapons, they didn't know. The few masters who had appeared in history had kept their refinement methods a secret. Even saint rank factions didn't know. Now that such a master refiner had appeared, it was exciting news for all saint rank factions. He can actually refine law weapons? Saint Hualei looked at Gray in astonishment, his expression changing. At this moment, he felt an inexplicable sense of regret. If he had known that the other party could refine a law weapon, he would not have been so unyielding. The Stellar Temple had him, a powerhouse of 3 laws, overseeing it. Over the years, they had already gathered all the materials needed to refine a law weapon. They only lacked a person who could refine a law weapon. It was a pity that such people were too rare. Only a few had appeared in history, and they were even rarer than law powerhouses. Since refining wasn't an option, Yongkai had the idea of robbing them. However, the relationships between the various saint-level forces were complex and complicated. If he tried to rob a saint-level force, he would likely be attacked by many other forces. Even he wouldn't be able to handle it, so he restrained himself. When he found out that Gray, someone who wasn't from a saint-ranked organization, had a rule weapon and didn't have any friendly relations with other saint-ranked organizations, he immediately chose him as a target to buy and rob. However, he didn't expect that the other party was actually a master refiner who could refine a law weapon that he had been looking for. If he had known this earlier, he definitely wouldn't have done this because there was no need. He didn't even need to pay the equivalent of 3 law magic ingredients to get the other party to help him obtain a law weapon. The Stellar Temple has made a bad move this time. Seeing Saint Hualei's expression turn ugly, a saint-ranked organization was full of smiles. The Stellar Temple had targeted Saint Gray because Saint Gray didn't have any friendly relations with other saint-ranked organizations. No saint-ranked organization would stand up for Saint Gray. And now, Saint Gray had become the target of all saint-ranked organizations. He was no longer someone the Stellar Temple could easily touch. If the Stellar Temple really dared to act willfully against Saint Gray, there would definitely be many saint-ranked organizations willing to give Saint Gray face. Your Excellency Gray, the Order Temple wants to use a law fruit as the price to ask you to refine a law weapon for the Order Temple. I wonder if you are willing to help? The old lady from the Order Temple walked to Gray's seat with a kind smile. Other saint-ranked organizations still had some consideration for Saint Hualei, but she wasn't afraid because she was also a powerhouse with 3 laws. Without benefits, she wouldn't offend Saint Hualei, but with the benefits of a law weapon, it was different. Sure, Gray agreed, and with the addition of the law fruit from the Order Temple, he had gathered all his cultivation resources. Moreover, he did have the idea of trying to refine a law weapon. He couldn't gather the materials himself, so it was just right to borrow the materials from the Order Temple. As for the failure of the refinement, he didn't think that he couldn't do something that even a blood beast could do. Your Excellency Gray, then let's go discuss the details. Okay, this way please. Under the old lady's guidance, Gray left with Ingba and Alan. The people from the various saint-ranked organizations looked at the departing group with anticipation in their eyes. What they had to do now was wait for the result of the Order Temple's refinement of the law weapon. If the refinement wasn't successful, then there was nothing to talk about. But if the refinement was successful, then they had to gather the materials even if they had to sell everything they had. If they missed this opportunity, it would be difficult to refine it in the future. When many saint-ranked organizations left, they didn't forget to look at the people from the Stellar Temple. Although they didn't have any expression on their faces, Rin Sui could guess that they were smiling in their hearts. There was no doubt that the Stellar Temple was the biggest loser in today's trade fair. They didn't get anything and instead got into trouble. Let's go. Saint Hualei's face was cold as he quickly led the people from the Stellar Temple back to their residence. Humph. I don't believe he can refine it successfully. The middle-aged man coldly snorted. But the law weapon in his hand has never appeared in the history of the Origin continent. A female powerhouse said with a frown. A law weapon isn't that easy to refine. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so few law weapons in the Origin world. That law weapon in his hand might just be good luck. The middle-aged man sneered. If the refinement fails, let's see how he explains it to the Order Temple. Sir Hualei, what should we do now? Should we still snatch the law weapon in his hand? The female powerhouse looked at Saint Hualei and asked, Let's wait and see. We'll talk about it after the results of the Order Temple's refinement. Saint Hualei decided after some consideration. In fact, he wasn't too optimistic about the other party's ability to refine a law weapon. He didn't know about the refinement of law weapons, but he knew about the refinement of ordinary weapons. The refinement had a success rate. The higher the grade of the weapon, the more difficult it was to refine. It was just that the higher the grade of the refinement master, the higher the success rate. In the residence of the Storm Temple. Who cut off your leg? The group of people from the Storm Temple returned to the residence that the Order Temple had arranged for them. Immediately, a disciple reported to them that Elder Tyler's leg had been cut off. The group was furious and immediately rushed to Elder Tyler's room. Seeing that Elder Tyler's legs had been cut off and could no longer be reattached, the Storm Temple's Saint Olay asked with rage in his voice. It's a law powerhouse, Elder Tyler said with a lingering fear. A law powerhouse? How did you provoke a law powerhouse? Tell me the details. Saint Olay of the Storm Temple suppressed his anger after knowing that the other party was a law powerhouse. Elder Tyler hurriedly recounted the entire incident. This matter was related to a law powerhouse, so he didn't dare to exaggerate. After all, if he exaggerated and provoked a powerful enemy for the Storm Temple, his end would be miserable when the Storm Temple found out. Tell me about that person's appearance. After hearing the story, Saint Olay of the Storm Temple's anger subsided a little. If it were him, with his violent temper, he would have crushed Elder Tyler to death with a finger. It was already good enough that the other party didn't kill him. It's a black-haired man. He looks very young, Elder Tyler described. Following his description, the anger on the faces of the people who had returned from the meeting, including Saint Olay of the Storm Temple, disappeared. From Elder Tyler's description, they already knew who it was. The other party was currently the most popular person among the saints, and the Storm Temple couldn't wait to curry favor with him. Why would they find trouble with him for an elder, especially when they were in the wrong? The Storm Temple's temple master coughed lightly. Sir Olay, why don't I bring Tyler to apologize? Apologize? Elder Tyler, who was lying on the bed, looked at his saint and big shot in astonishment. Although he was in the wrong in this matter, he had already received the lesson he deserved. Yet, they still wanted him to go and apologize. This was too much. Where had the pride of the Storm Temple all this time gone? No hurry. Let's wait for the results of the Storm Temple's law weapon refinement. Saint Olay of the Storm Temple shook his head and left the room. The Storm Temple's pride was still necessary. At the very least, they had to wait until the other party refined the law weapon before apologizing. The big shots of the Storm Temple looked at each other, patted Elder Tyler, and hurriedly followed, leaving Elder Tyler alone with a face full of astonishment. The Storm Temple was actually refining a law weapon? But what did the Storm Temple's refining have to do with that person? After leaving the residence of the Storm Temple's saint, Gray brought Ingba and Alan to live in the courtyard arranged by the Storm Temple. It could be seen that the Storm Temple had put in a lot of effort to entertain him. The scenery of this courtyard was the best among the several courtyards around. I will be refining the law weapon in the next few days. If you have nothing to do, you can go to the trade fair and have a look. After finishing his meal, Gray instructed the two and then entered the plane alone. Chapter 845. Upon entering the plane, Gray summoned the Crimson Behemoth. With a wave of his hand, 6 fist-sized pieces of metal appeared in the outside world. These were the materials the Temple of Order had given him to refine a law weapon. The 6 pieces of metal had 6 colors. At first glance, they didn't seem very eye-catching, but upon closer inspection, one would feel that these metals had some sort of natural quality. Although they were only the size of an adult's fist, due to their high density, each piece weighed several dozen kilograms. Swish, swish, swish. Controlling the Crimson Behemoth, Gray used his metal ability to control the 6 pieces of metal to appear in front of the Crimson Behemoth. Under the influence of the refinement law, the previously confused Gray immediately thought of several refinement methods that used these 6 pieces of metal as materials. He naturally understood the advantages and disadvantages of each refinement method by heart. For example, the refinement method that used darkness metal as the main framework would produce a law weapon with the greatest amplification effect on the law of darkness. For example, the refinement method that used soul metal as the main framework would produce a law weapon with the greatest amplification effect on soul-type laws. The most common law ability of the Temple of Order was the Law of Clam. Gray chose the refinement method that had the best amplification effect on this law ability. After going through the refinement method in his mind several times, Gray began the refinement. 6 black flames appeared under the 6 pieces of metal and began to melt and soften them. Rule metals were extremely hard and resistant to fire and poison. Fortunately, the Crimson Behemoth was a rule blood beast and had a law ability like the Law of Flame. Otherwise, Gray would have a headache finding a suitable flame. Even so, it would take a long time to refine and purify these 6 pieces of metal. After a full day, the 6 pieces of metal finally showed signs of melting. At this time, the temperature of the 6 pieces of metal had already exceeded 1,000,000 degrees. Several more hours passed before the 6 pieces of metal completely melted into liquid. Different metal liquids were purified at different temperatures. It took another day for the first step of liquefying and purifying the metal to be completed. Gray immediately began the second step, which was to mix the liquid metal according to the ratio. As for the specific ratio, he had already used the refining law to find out. Now, he only needed to separate the liquid metal of the corresponding weight and mix it. Darkness metal 28, 12 kilograms, soul metal 21, 34 kilograms, orange metal 30, 8 kilograms. The metal ability was activated, and clumps of metal were separated and mixed. With the characteristics of the metal ability, it was not too difficult to accurately separate and fuse metals of the corresponding weight. Soon, the metal liquid was mixed. Then, he began the third step, shaping with the metal ability. This step did not affect the crafting of the weapon too much. Following the request of the Temple of Order, he molded it into a cross sword. The handle was like a ferocious beast's claw, and both ends of the handle had sharp claws that gleamed with cold light. The blade of the sword looked like it was polished from the horn of a ferocious beast. The blade was wide and sharp, and there were long and narrow blood grooves in the center of the left and right sides. Next, he began to sort out and arrange the internal microstructure of the sword. This was the most crucial step in determining the amplification effect of a rule weapon. It had the same effect as a rune master inscribing runes. It was the step that tested the crafting ability the most. This was why 99% of master craftsmen were unable to craft a rule weapon. However, this was not too difficult for Gray, who had mastered the refining law. The refining law enveloped the cross sword. Under the influence of the law ability, the internal microstructure of the cross sword began to arrange itself according to a certain pattern. The cross sword was like a river of stars, and the billions of metal ions within it were celestial bodies. They arranged themselves according to a certain pattern, following a certain rule, implying a certain rule. At this point, the refinement of the rule weapon was complete. Whoosh whoosh. The grayish-white cross sword was thrown into the lake. Large amounts of white steam rose, and the lake water quickly evaporated. In the end, the lake, which was thousands of square meters in area, was completely evaporated. Under the metal ability, the cross sword turned back and appeared in front of Gray. Removing the control of the red behemoth, Gray held the crossed sword in his hand and used his fire ability. A dangerous purple flame burned on the crossed sword. Gray carefully sensed the strength of the amplification. A moment later, his eyes lit up. It's done. He did not immediately hand the sword over to the Order Temple. Gray returned to the wooden house and fell asleep. With the strength of his body, staying up for a few days would not affect him at all. However, the process of crafting the weapon consumed a lot of mental energy. Even he could not help but feel exhausted at this time. The next day, after resting for a day, Gray completely recovered. Feeling refreshed, he contacted the Order Temple. Soon, he met with Saint Valentina of the Order Temple and the upper echelons of the Order Temple. Everyone looked at him expectantly and anxiously. They wanted to hear the news of successful refinement, but they were also afraid of hearing the news of a failure. For a long time, no one took the initiative to ask. In the end, it was Saint Valentina of the Order Temple who asked, "Your Excellency Gray, have you completed the refinement?" "Your Excellency Valentina, you should test it yourself." Gray smiled and took out the cross sword from his space item. Saint Valentina took the cross sword with trembling hands. Then, under the nervous gazes of the upper echelons, she poured some lightning energy into it. Crackle. Silver-white lightning coiled around the crossblade, like dozens of silver snakes slithering around the blade. Saint Valentina used the perception of a law powerhouse to carefully sense the amplification effect of this sword. A moment later, she could not hide the joy on her face as she spoke excitedly. "It's a law weapon. Your Excellency Gray has succeeded in crafting it." Even though she was a powerhouse of laws, she could no longer control her emotions at this moment. She had to vent all of her emotions. A law weapon, the goal of the Order Temple from the beginning of its establishment, had finally been achieved in her hands. The refinement was a success. That's great. The Order Temple finally has a law weapon. Hearing Saint Valentina's affirmation, the upper echelons of the Order Temple, who were nervously watching with their hearts about to jump out of their chests, were ecstatic. Some of them were so excited that tears welled up in their eyes. The goal of the Order Temple for more than 100,000 years had finally been achieved in their generation today. This kind of excitement could no longer be expressed with words. "Your Excellency Gray, please name this law weapon." After a while, they calmed down a little. Holding the law weapon, Saint Valentina looked gratefully at Gray. Gray didn't refuse. It was the privilege of a refiner to name the weapon he refined. After thinking for a while, he said, "All right." After some thought, he said, "This is the sword I refined for the Order Temple. Let's call it the Sword of Order." After bidding farewell to the excited upper echelons of the Order Temple, Gray returned to his residence in the Order Temple. The news of the successful refinement of the law weapon spread like wildfire to the various saint forces who had been paying attention. He really succeeded in refining it. His Excellency Gray can really refine a law weapon. The faces of the people from the saint forces were filled with shock and excitement. They were shocked and excited by this news. "Quick, contact the temple and bring over the materials we collected for the law weapon." "No, they're too slow. I'll go back personally." "Inform the temple to collect the law metals at all costs. Send people to the other temples to exchange for them. While the other temples still don't know about this news, we have to exchange for the law metals at a high price." The various saint forces began to move. Immediately, several law powerhouses turned into streaks of light and left the Order Temple, rushing back to their own temples or to other saint forces who had not come to participate in the saint trade meeting. The many top forces who were participating in the saint trade meeting were unaware of this. They watched in astonishment as several law powerhouses turned into streaks of light and left. They did not understand what had happened that caused several law powerhouses to leave at the same time. Did he really succeed in refining it? The middle-aged man from the Stellar Temple looked as if he had seen a ghost. The other party had really succeeded. He really was a master refiner who could refine law weapons. St. Horatio's expression was uncertain. He stood there for a long time without saying a word. Originally, he should be happy that a master refiner who could refine law weapons had appeared. However, He could not be happy now because he had offended this master refiner. He wanted to admit defeat, but if he did so, the Stellar Temple would probably become a joke among the various Saint forces. Saint Gray, I am deeply ashamed that my elder did such a thing. This is the Storm Temple's apology. Please accept it. I brought him here today. You can do whatever you want with him. The first to visit Gray was the Storm Temple. The Storm Temple Saint personally brought Elder Tyler, who had once offended Gray, to apologize. He used 3 grade 6 magic herbs as an apology and handed Elder Tyler over to Gray to be dealt with. It could be said that he was very sincere. Storm Saint, you don't have to do this. This matter is over. I have no intention of pursuing it any further. However, I cut off the elder's legs without saying anything. I hope Storm Saint doesn't blame me. Saint Gray is joking. This person offended Saint Gray. This is what he deserves. Saint Gray spared his life, which has already made the Storm Temple very grateful. The Storm Temple Saint, who had lost his last backbone, said with a smile, if the other party had not been able to refine a law weapon with the backbone of the Storm Temple, he would naturally not have come to apologize. However, the other party had refined a law weapon and became the person of the Storm Temple. Even if he had a backbone, he had a compromise at this time. And if he could use this to get closer to the other party, it would only be good for the Storm Temple. Saint Gray must be very busy later. We won't disturb you. After paying their respects, the Storm Temple decisively left. They knew that there would definitely be many Saint forces visiting Gray today. At this time, it was naturally inconvenient for them to stay. The latest chapter of the Divine Blood Warrior came to the website. Chapter 846. Just as the Storm Temple had expected, Gray's temporary residence arranged by the Order Temple received a steady stream of visitors. One after another, Saint Grade organizations came to visit with gifts and smiles on their faces. Their attitudes were polite, without the slightest arrogance of a Saint Grade organization. If the top clans under these Saint Grade organizations saw this, they would probably doubt their eyes. Was this really the arrogant temple that they used to be? Was this really the unsmiling temple head that they used to be? This was all because the value of a law weapon was too great, so great that even these lofty Saint Grade organizations had no choice but to lower their posture. And Gray also showed the due enthusiasm towards the goodwill of these Saint Grade organizations. These Saint Grade organizations were his future potential customers, so he had to show the necessary enthusiasm. During the conversation, 2 Saint Grade organizations clearly expressed that they wanted to ask Gray to refine a law weapon for them, and Gray agreed. In 2 or 3 days, he would be able to obtain something of the same value as a law weapon. He was naturally very happy to do this kind of business that had almost no cost. After sending off another wave of people, the sky was already dark. Just when Gray thought that no one would come to visit him again, an unexpected person appeared. This was a middle-aged man, a tall and thin middle-aged man. It was the middle-aged man standing behind the Saint of the Star Temple a few days ago. Because of the conflict a few days ago, he originally thought that the Star Temple would not send anyone, but he did not expect them to send someone. Of course, their sincerity was just that. They only sent a powerhouse without even a congratulatory gift, and their attitude was still very high. Congratulations, Sir Gray, for successfully refining a law weapon. There was no smile on the middle-aged man's face as he congratulated Gray in a formal manner. Many thanks. Gray responded in a neutral tone, which could be considered as a response. Gray did not wish to say much, and the middle-aged man did not speak for a long time due to his reserved nature. The atmosphere fell into silence, and after a while, the middle-aged man broke the silence. Sir Gray, I actually have a request for this visit. I'm sorry. My abilities are limited. I might not be able to help. Gray decisively refused. Just a few days ago, he had wanted to forcefully buy his rule-bending weapon, pinching his nose and glaring at him. Now, he actually had the gall to come knocking on his door. He could be considered to have witnessed the thickness of his skin. No, His Excellency Gray can do it. This time, I'm here on behalf of the Starry Temple to ask His Excellency Gray to forge a weapon of laws for us. The reward will be the same as the Order Temples, a rule-type mana herb. Although it was a request, the middle-aged man's attitude was still very lofty. I'm sorry, but I've already agreed to help other saint-ranked organizations refine law weapons. I don't have time. As expected, they came for this. Gray sneered in his heart and decisively refused. Although rule-type magic herbs were good, it also depended on who the trade partner was. Trading with a force like the Star Temple would only make him unhappy. Since he was unhappy, then forget it. That's not a problem. My Starry Temple can wait. The middle-aged man hurriedly said, "Let's talk about it later. Ingba, see the guest out." Gray had already lost his patience and directly called for Ingba to see the guest out. After being chased out by Gray, the middle-aged man stood up with an ashen face and glared at Gray. He didn't say anything and turned to leave. Although he was furious, he understood that the other party was a law powerhouse and wasn't someone he could contend against. The middle-aged man returned to his temporary residence in the Starry Temple with an ashen face. Did it fail? Seeing his expression, Sage Huolei had already guessed the result. Yes, Sir Huolei. That guy doesn't know what's good for him. My Starry Temple has already lowered our stance, but he still didn't want to let it go. The middle-aged man furiously said, "Humph, he doesn't know what's good for him." Sage Huolei coldly snorted. Naive. Do you really think those saint-ranked organizations can protect you forever? His eyes were filled with intense, killing intent, and his previous plan became even more intense. Since he wasn't willing to help forge a law weapon, then he would just have to contribute his life and the law weapon. The reason why the saint-ranked organizations were so enthusiastic about him was because he could forge a law weapon. Once he was killed, the saint-ranked organizations might not stand up for him. In a few days, new saint-ranked organizations arrived one after another. After another saint-ranked organization trade fair was held, the Sacred Trade Fair was nearing its end. With Shadow 8 and Alan, Gray walked between the trading square and the trading courtyard as a leisurely stroll. Suddenly, his footsteps paused, and then he continued to walk forward. The Earth Vein Fruit has indeed been targeted by other saint-ranked organizations. Just now, he had received news from St. Walter that not long ago, 3 powerhouses of laws had attacked the island with the Earth Vein Fruit in an attempt to snatch it. However, in the face of him and 4 law blood beasts with combat strength comparable to veteran law powerhouses, the 3 of them fled with serious injuries. There are quite a few saint-ranked organizations that have their eyes on them. 3 law powerhouses have actually joined forces. Gray wasn't surprised by the 3 law powerhouses. Back then, when the news of the Earth Vein Fruit leaked, even the people he sent could find out the relevant information, let alone saint-ranked organizations. The Sacred Trade Fair is about to end. Why don't we rush back now? Although the 3 law powerhouses had been repelled, Gray was still a little worried about the 3 Earth Vein Fruits, and the idea of rushing to the island as soon as possible arose in his mind. With this decision, Gray immediately took action. After bidding farewell to the Order Temple and agreeing on a refining time with the 2 saint-ranked organizations that wanted to refine the weapons, Gray teleported to the island with Shadow 8 and Alan. In just a short while, he had already arrived at the island from the Order Temple. Upon arriving at the island, Gray immediately rushed to the location of the Earth Vein Fruits. He saw that the Earth Vein Fruits, which were originally green, had almost completely turned yellow. The entire runic array was filled with a rich fragrance, which was emitted by the Earth Vein Fruits. Fortunately, it was in the middle of the runic array. Otherwise, the entire island would probably be filled with the fragrance. They'll ripen in a week at most. After personally checking, Gray came to a conclusion. While delighted, he immediately built a wooden house beside the Earth Vein Fruits with his ability and stayed there to guard them personally. Soon, 6 days passed, and the green color of the Earth Vein Fruits completely turned yellow. The 3 Earth Vein Fruits were completely ripe. Gray immediately took out a wooden box, plucked the 3 Earth Vein Fruits, put them in the wooden box, and stored them in his spatial item. Even after he stored the Earth Vein Fruits in his spatial item, no law powerhouses came to snatch them. It seemed that the 3 law powerhouses had given up 2 days ago, and other than those 3, There should not be any other saint-ranked organizations eyeing the earth vein fruits. However, he did not know that the three-law powerhouses had immediately given up after failing to snatch the earth vein fruits. The three-law powerhouses had joined forces, originally thinking that the earth vein fruits would be theirs, but they did not expect that it was not them who had the advantage in numbers, but the other party. Although the other party was only one person, he had the assistance of 4 law-blood beasts comparable to veteran law powerhouses. His combat strength was almost twice their own. They had originally planned to gang up on the other party, but they did not expect to be ganged up on and almost died there, paying the price of serious injuries to escape. After escaping, the 3 of them did not think about how to take revenge. Instead, they warned themselves not to provoke the Earth Temple in the future. The hidden strength of this organization was too terrifying, and it was not something they could provoke. In the temporary residence of the Star Temple in the Order Temple, he has already left in advance. Looks like he's on guard against us. Saint Hualei pondered. He had originally planned to wait for Gray to leave the Order Temple, but he did not expect the other party to have already left in advance. The other party was clearly on guard against him. That should be the case. 2 days ago, after greeting the Order Temple and the 2 saint-ranked organizations that asked him to refine a law weapon, he quietly left. The middle-aged man nodded. Then what should we do? He doesn't have a fixed residence. It will probably be very difficult to find him in the future. The woman said, I have a way. He can't escape. The middle-aged man smiled proudly. What way? Saint Hualei asked. I have already inquired about the time he has agreed to meet with the 2 temples. Lord Hualei only needs to lay an ambush on the path that he must pass through on his way to the 2 temples. We will definitely be able to wait for him to appear. The middle-aged man revealed a cold smile. The memory of being chased out of the courtyard by Gray a few days ago was still fresh in his mind. He had never felt so humiliated before. Since he could not kill the other party personally, he would contribute to killing the other party and give the other party a big gift. Well done. Saint Hualei's eyes emitted intense, killing intent. He had schemed against the other party. Coupled with his strength as a 3-law powerhouse and his domain law ability that had a sealing effect, the other party would definitely die. Chapter 847. Now that I've obtained the blood of the Law of I have enough law-type magic herbs for comprehension, so I can continue comprehending the laws. But before that, I have to make a trip to the 2 temples. Now that he had obtained 3 more rule-type mana herbs, Gray was in a good mood. He couldn't help but wish he could consume the rule-type mana herbs to comprehend the laws of nature. However, before that, there was something he needed to do. Even with the assistance of law-type magic herbs, a single comprehension would take at least several years. Furthermore, he was preparing to comprehend 3 laws in one go, including the Law of I, so it would take even longer. However, he had an agreement with the 2 temples to refine weapons of law, so he decided to make a trip to the 2 temples to refine their weapons of law first. After refining their weapons of law, he would then start to comprehend them using law-type magic ingredients. Returning to the continent, Gray rushed to the plant temple according to the map of the origin world in his mind. The plant temple was a saint force located in the south of the origin world. Among the many saint forces, it was a rather powerful one. Although this saint force didn't have 3 law-type powerhouses, their current saint was one of the strongest among the veteran law-type powerhouses. Their strength was on the same level as Basilica of the Holy Blood Saint Rudolph. Because he had never been to this force before, he naturally couldn't teleport over a long distance. Gray could only teleport over short distances. After spending several days, he arrived at the plant temple built in the forest. This was a temple whose architectural style leaned towards nature. Many of the buildings were made of plants, but this didn't mean that the buildings weren't sturdy. On the contrary, because these plants were nurtured by powerful wood-type ability users, they were more sturdy than most metals. Saint Gray, please. Knowing that Gray had arrived, the plant temple's saint personally welcomed him. This was a middle-aged woman with a plump figure, graceful and luxurious. It was hard to imagine that such a noble-looking woman would be one of the strongest among the veteran law-type powerhouses of the origin world. Who is that? He's actually being welcomed by the saint, accompanied by the temple master and other big shots. He's so young. He doesn't seem to have taken the beauty potion. Why does it feel like he's about the same age as us? Far away, the disciples of the plant temple, as well as some elders who didn't know the inside story, were sizing up Gray with astonished gazes. It had been many years since a person worthy of the highest reception from the plant temple had appeared. But what made them even more surprised was that the person who received such high treatment from the plant temple seemed to be very young. It's him. The young men and women of the plant temple who had seen Gray in the Temple of Order looked at Gray in astonishment. He did not expect to meet Gray again in such an occasion. And although he knew that Gray was extremely powerful, he did not expect that Gray would receive the highest level of treatment from the Divine Temple. Only a young woman with above-average looks was not surprised. She knew that Gray was a powerhouse of laws, and it was only natural that the sacred temple would treat a powerhouse of laws with the highest level of respect. However, she was very curious just how old the other party was. Both his appearance and aura were very young. It was very difficult to imagine that such a person was already a master of laws. Kajili, do you know something? The young woman's abnormality was immediately noticed by her companions, and a woman with very long eyelashes asked. The others also looked curiously at the young woman. Forget it. I'll just tell you. The young woman hesitated for a moment. Thinking about it, the other party's identity would definitely spread very quickly, so there was no need to keep it secret. That person is a powerhouse of laws. She lowered her voice and spoke in a voice that only the surrounding people could hear. What? He is... The surrounding people all cried out in alarm, but they immediately reacted. If this matter were to spread, it would inevitably cause a commotion. They hurriedly covered their mouths, but they were still shocked inside. Such a young person was actually a powerhouse of laws. This was simply inconceivable. I'll let St. Gray see a joke. Although the young woman had lowered her voice, it was still clearly heard by Gray and the middle-aged woman, who had reached the boundary of laws. The middle-aged woman smiled apologetically. It's fine. Gray shook his head. He had no intention of hiding it. If they knew, then so be it. He did not care too much about it. After staying in the plant temple for 3 days, Gray used the law material provided by the plant temple to successfully forge a law weapon. After naming it the Sword of Life and receiving a piece of darkness metal from the plant temple as a reward, Gray left the plant temple. So, Gray was currently rushing to the Moon Temple. The second temple he had promised to forge a law weapon to was the Moon Temple. After forging a law weapon for the Moon Temple, the remaining materials and the soul metal promised by the Moon Temple will probably be enough for me to forge a law weapon. After refining 2 weapons of laws in succession, there would always be some leftover metals of laws. Gray naturally accepted them without hesitation. He estimated that the leftover metal from the refinement of the law weapon, as well as the 2 pieces of metal as compensation, would be enough for him to refine a law weapon. What kind of law weapon should I forge? Gray was looking forward to it. A law weapon was not something that could only be used by one person. The reason why the people he met only had 1 law weapon at most was because law weapons were too precious. A single force could not afford 2. After coming in contact with the refining law, Gray's knowledge of law weapons rose with the tide. He knew that if law weapons could complement each other, they could even have an amplification effect that surpassed ordinary law weapons. If he could forge a law weapon that complemented the sun's sword, his fighting strength would surely soar again. A few days later, Gray was already close to the Moon Temple. It would take him at most half a day to reach there. Crash. While hurrying on his way, Gray suddenly felt a strange fluctuation sweep over his body. Then, the world before his eyes abruptly changed. The original day turned into night, and the sky was filled with a large number of stars. It was just that these stars looked very unreal. They were really too close to him, no more than 1,000 meters away, and every one of them was extremely huge. Not good. Gray suddenly became alert. Without a doubt, he must have fallen into some kind of ability. He immediately wanted to teleport away, but he gravely found that after teleporting, he did not leave the environment before him. Not far from him, a barrier blocked his path. "I've been waiting for a long time, but I've finally waited for you." An old man's voice resounded in the starry sky. Saint Horatio appeared with a sneer on his face. There were 2 temples. Because he did not know which temple Gray would go to first, he had chosen to lie in ambush on the path that Gray would have to pass to reach the Moon Temple. In the end, the first place Gray went to was the Plant Temple, and the second was the Moon Temple. As a result, he had been waiting here for quite some time. "Saint Horatio, it really is you." After seeing the stars in the sky, Gray already had a vague guess about the person who ambushed him. The Star Temple was most proficient in the law of stars. Coupled with his bad relationship with the Star Temple, the first person he thought of to deal with him was Saint Horatio. 15_15674/ Chapter 848. So what if it's me? You have nowhere to run now. Saint Hua Lei didn't care at all. The Star Domain was an ability derived from his 3 laws. Even a 3-law powerhouse would find it difficult to escape if they were trapped in it, let alone the other party. "You didn't expect me to ambush you, did you?" A blacksmith master who can refine a law weapon. A dead blacksmith master is no longer a blacksmith master. "I don't believe that a Saint grade force will stand up for you after I kill you." Saint Hua Lei laughed proudly. "As for your law weapon, my Star Temple will kindly accept it." Boom! Following Saint Hua Lei's words, a star in the sky suddenly moved as if it was falling. Accompanied by a terrifying momentum, it fell toward Gray. Whoosh! Gray's expression was solemn as he teleported in a small area to avoid the falling star. After the falling star smashed into the ground, it immediately exploded with a terrifying power. At the center, a scene of destruction appeared as if a nuclear bomb had exploded. Under the unparalleled power, everything was shattered. If not for the fact that he was in a certain domain, it would have affected everything within hundreds of miles. Strengthen. The curse rule was activated, and a bloody light enveloped Gray's body. Gray's basic strength suddenly skyrocketed. The sun's sword appeared in Gray's hand, and the power of the Blood Fiend ability skyrocketed again, instantly putting him at his peak state. Facing a 3-law powerhouse, even Gray didn't dare to be careless, especially now that he was trapped in the other party's domain. What a good law weapon! Looking at the sun's sword that was emitting golden light, Saint Hua Lei's eyes were burning. Judging from the aura emitted by the sword, he could tell that it was definitely a law weapon. His desire to obtain it became even stronger. So what if he offended a blacksmith master? So what if the blacksmith master refused to help him refine a law weapon? He would just snatch it. He even had the idea of capturing the other party and imprisoning him so that he would spend the rest of his life refining for the Star Temple. That would be more satisfying than killing the other party, and he could also obtain more benefits. The Stellar Temple had the materials to refine law weapons, so in addition to the law weapon in his opponent's hand, he could immediately obtain a second law weapon. In addition, with his current cultivation level, if he traded with the other temples, or even coerced them, he might be able to gather a third weapon of laws. Just the thought of having 3 precept weapons made him excited. Even if it were the other 3 precept weapons, he was confident that he could defeat or even kill them. Perhaps he could rely on these 3 rule weapons to become the only saint-level faction in the Source World. No, it could no longer be called a saint-level faction. It should be called a faction above saint-level. Rumble. The falling star was just a precursor. With a thought, all the stars in the sky began to move. Burning with different lights and accompanied by a terrifying commotion, they fell from all directions towards Gray. Spatial maze. Seeing the changes in the stars in the sky, Gray's face turned solemn. Space ripples spread out, and with him, as the center, space transmission points appeared one after another within a dozen miles. Originally, the space maze could cover at least 100 to 200 miles, but it was obviously suppressed by the star domain and could only cover a few dozen miles. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Although it was suppressed, the space maze's ability to transmit was not suppressed. The stars were transmitted one after another when they came into contact with the space transmission points. Some of them collided with each other, while others were sent towards the Hoale Saint. Oomph. The Hoale Saint merely snorted coldly, and the stars that collided with him dissipated like smoke. In the star domain, he was the absolute ruler. All the stars would move according to his will. You set up a large number of space transmission points around you to send the attacks away. So what? He sneered in disdain. In the sky, the falling stars appeared once more. Afterwards, the stars actually drew close to each other in the sky and fused together, turning into huge stars the size of mountains. The stars fell, and the end of the world arrived. Rumble. The huge stars that were the size of mountains fell one after another, and the momentum was even greater than before. The entire domain was filled with this terrifying sound, and it was filled with the blade-like wind caused by the falling stars. It was as if the stars were falling, and it was a doomsday-like scene. The power was obviously higher than before. Crack! All the stars collided with Gray, and the space maze's space transmission points shattered under the impact of the terrifying stars. At the same time, there were dozens of huge stars that were the size of mountains that collided with Gray. Whoosh! Gray teleported to avoid a huge star that was about to collide with him, but the entire space was filled with falling stars. Where could he hide? Oh no! After several consecutive teleportations, Gray finally couldn't dodge in time. As soon as he teleported and appeared, a huge star was already colliding with him, and it was very close to him. The terrifying gales brought about by the falling stars slammed into his body. They were like peerless blades. His body, which was a veteran of rules, was actually lacerated with bloody wounds. Space barrier. He decisively put up a space barrier above his head, and the moment the space barrier was put up, the huge star that was the size of a mountain collided with the space barrier. The space barrier could be said to be the strongest defensive ability, but from Gray's current perspective, it was a little exaggerated. At least, as far as he knew, if a law weapon was refined into the body with the law of arms ability, the defense would not be inferior to the space barrier. Even so, the space barrier could still be called a top defensive ability. It was a powerful shield among abilities, and it was an excellent means to save one's life at a critical moment. However, crack. With just one collision, cracks appeared on the space barrier as if it couldn't bear the burden. The cracks spread like glass, and one could clearly see the spread of the cracks. Fortunately, the space barrier's defense finally blocked the huge star that crashed down, withstanding the impact of the huge star. However, in the next moment, before Gray could breathe a sigh of relief, another huge star collided with him. Rumble crack. The space barrier could no longer withstand it, and under the terrifying power of the huge star that was like a nuclear explosion, it was completely shattered. The fragments of space sputtered everywhere, and the terrifying shockwave that the huge star carried, like a nuclear explosion, hit the shattered space barrier. Chapter 849. Whoosh! The spatial barrier shattered, and a terrifying impact swept down. Spatial cracks spread all over, swallowing the surrounding air. The terrifying impact swept down like an ocean. At the critical moment, Gray teleported and disappeared, avoiding the terrifying impact. Although the spatial barrier shattered, it bought Gray a chance to teleport away. However, he was now trapped in the star domain and was surrounded by falling stars. When he appeared a few dozen kilometers away, he was once again attacked by huge stars. Hum! Clang! Gray's expression was grim. Beside him, the pitch-black orb that had been strengthened by the laws of curse and the sun sword appeared. Then, it immediately turned into a pitch-black sword. It radiated with a peerlessly sharp aura as it slashed towards the nearest star. Compared to the giant star that was thousands of meters in diameter and comparable to a giant mountain, the pitch-black sword that was less than a meter long was extremely small. However, the pitch-black sword exuded a peerless sharpness as if it was the representation of destruction. Although its size was far smaller than the giant star, the movement it caused was no less than that of the giant star. Puff! An exaggerated scene appeared. The giant star that was thousands of meters in diameter was actually split in half by the pitch-black sword that was less than a meter long. The two halves of the giant star fell to both sides and exploded. What this power? Hualei Saint, who had been winning from beginning to end, had a change in expression for the first time. He stared at the pitch-black sword that had split the giant star and automatically flew back to Gray's side. This kind of falling giant star was the limit of combat power that the star domain could mobilize. Its power had reached the level of 3 laws and was its strongest combat power. Logically speaking, with the other party's realm, even with the enhancement of a law weapon, it should be impossible for him to block it. However, the pitch-black sword had clearly blocked it. In other words, the other party's combat power had also reached the level of 3 laws. At this moment, another giant star that contained the terrifying power of a nuclear explosion crashed toward Gray. Puff! The pitch-black sword shot out from Gray's side again. The next moment, the giant star was split in half again. With the enhancement of the Curse Rule and Sun Sword, the pitch-black sword's power was no weaker than a level of 3 laws. The power of 3 laws. Another huge star was shattered by the pitch-black sword. Hualei Saint's eyes were filled with bewilderment. Being able to shatter 2 huge stars in a row showed that the other party did indeed possess battle prowess comparable to 3 precepts. His expression was solemn, and a trace of anxiety appeared in his heart. He pushed his star domain to the limit, and one after another, huge stars shot towards Gray. Boom, boom, boom. One after another, huge stars, like nuclear bombs, attacked Gray from all directions. Even though he knew that the power of the pitch-black sword was enough to shatter the giant stars, Gray still wore a grave expression on his face as he watched the giant stars attack him one after another. With the help of the Rule of Curse, his battle prowess could barely be considered to have reached the level of 3 Rule of Law. However, his opponent's battle prowess could be considered to have reached the level of 3 Rule of Law. He could only make the power of the pitch-black sword reach the level of 3 laws, but the other party could make the power of each of the huge stars reach the level of 3 laws. I have to break this situation. Gray looked at Hualei Saint with murderous intent. The next moment, he disappeared from the encirclement of the huge stars and appeared in front of Hualei Saint. The pitch-black sword was like a sharp blade in the hands of a peerless assassin. It turned into a black light and stabbed toward Hualei Saint. Hualei Saint snorted in the face of the incoming sword. A blue spear appeared in his hand, emitting a dazzling blue light as soon as it appeared, attracting the power of the stars. This was a spear that was mixed with the materials of a law weapon. Although it didn't reach the level of laws in all aspects, it surpassed a top-notch heritage weapon. Clang! The blue spear collided with the tip of the pitch-black sword. At the point of collision, dazzling light burst forth, and a terrifying shockwave swept out in all directions. Then, the pitch-black sword was pushed back by the terrifying impact and flew back to Gray's side. As a powerhouse at the level of 3 laws, the other party's power wasn't limited to the huge stars with terrifying power. He could also reach the level of 3 laws in close combat. Boom! After knocking away the pitch-black sword, Hualei Saint's eyes turned cold. He had already put away his contempt for Gray. His speed at the level of 3 laws burst forth as he charged toward Gray with the blue spear in his hand. The blue spear emitted a dazzling blue light. Although it was small, it contained power that wasn't weaker than the huge stars. It pierced toward Gray. Crack! The space violently shattered, and a pitch-black river appeared in the air. As the spear continued to spread, it was the shattered space. Whoosh! Knowing that the power of this spear was enough to reach the level of 3 laws, Gray didn't hesitate to teleport away and dodge the spear. Rumble! As soon as he teleported and reappeared, another huge star attacked him. Puff! At the critical moment, he recalled the pitch-black sword. The pitch-black sword turned into a black light and cut the huge star in half. Your combat strength has barely reached the level of 3 laws. However, you're shrouded in my domain. You won't be able to escape even if you have wings. You'll still die without a doubt. Hualei Saint said in a cold voice as he watched Gray shatter the huge star and escape with his life with a little regret. The star domain was his confidence. Even if the other party's combat strength had reached the level of 3 laws, as long as the other party was still within the star domain, he would be killed sooner or later. I have to break the cage. Gray's expression was solemn. He once again teleported away to avoid another huge star that was attacking him. Although he had the ability to teleport, he couldn't escape the range of the domain. Now, he was like a bird in a cage. He had to break the cage. When he appeared at the edge of the domain. The pitch-black sword turned into a black light and crashed into the domain barrier. Boom! Under the impact of the pitch-black sword, the domain barrier let out a loud sound, as if the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. It shook violently, and cracks appeared on the surface. Although they were very small, they did exist. Obviously, this kind of domain barrier had a limit. After being enhanced, the pitch-black sword's power had reached the level of 3 laws. It had the ability to break it. It's working. Gray's eyes lit up. He wanted to control the pitch-black sword to crash into the crack again. He wanted to continuously crash into the domain barrier and break it. You want to break the domain barrier and escape? Have you asked for my permission? Huolei Saint sneered. Several huge stars appeared beside the domain barrier and crashed into Gray. If Gray insisted on attacking the domain barrier, he would very likely be hit by the huge stars. Whoosh! He revealed a trace of unwillingness on his face, but he immediately teleported away. If he didn't, he would die on the spot. You'll die here today. Huolei Saint sneered after stopping Gray. He mobilized the star domain to repair the cracked domain barrier. You want to kill him? Have you asked for my permission? At this moment, a female voice suddenly appeared in the star domain. Crack! Then, a large number of cracks suddenly appeared on the domain barrier that was being repaired. In the end, it actually shattered with a crack, revealing a huge hole. From the hole, a woman in a purple dress stepped into it. Chapter 850. Pa! 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 The woman's appearance was peerless and extremely beautiful. She was like a mysterious flower blooming under the moonlight with a mysterious temperament. It was impossible to tell her age. She looked like a teenage girl, but also like a young woman in her 20s. The woman was neither fast nor slow. Step by step, she stepped into the star domain that was extremely dangerous for Gray. St. Taylor. St. Huolei's face changed abruptly when he saw the woman who had suddenly appeared. His face became extremely solemn. He clearly knew the woman and was very afraid of her. St. Huolei, you want to kill my guest? St. Taylor raised her eyebrows and asked angrily. She was the current generation saint of the Moon Temple, an expert of 3 laws like St. Huolei. The place where the battle took place wasn't too far from the Moon Temple, so she had already noticed the battle from the beginning and immediately rushed over. When she arrived, she discovered a huge domain that covered hundreds of miles. Seeing Gray being attacked by St. Huolei, she immediately flew into a rage. Gray was an honored guest of the Moon Temple and was invited by her to refine a law weapon. If he was killed, who would refine the law weapon for the Moon Temple? So she broke the star domain and barged in. St. Taylor, is your Moon Temple really going to interfere in this matter? St. Huolei said coldly. He had expected that the battle here would be noticed by the Moon Temple, but there was no other way. This was the only way to ambush Gray. Only here could he ambush Gray. He originally wanted to kill Gray before St. Taylor arrived, but Gray's strength was beyond his expectations. Although he wasn't as strong as him, he couldn't kill him in a short time. St. Gray is an honored guest of my Moon Temple. Anyone who attacks him is provoking my Moon Temple. St. Taylor snorted coldly. Fine, I'll see if you've improved after so many years. He was unwilling to give up just like that. St. Huolei's eyes were filled with coldness as huge stars attacked St. Taylor one after another. As you wish. Taylor Saint's pretty face also turned cold. She stood there without moving, and a purple light was emitted from her body. In the sky, a gigantic purple moon appeared. It extended for more than 10 miles, and was even larger than the gigantic star. Swish, swish, swish. Streaks of purple light shot out from the purple moon one after another. They were like purple rivers, crashing into giant stars one after another. Rumble, rumble, rumble. As the two collided, balls of blazing light exploded one after another. It was as if nuclear bombs were exploding in the sky one after another. Terrifying shockwaves spread out over and over again, overlapping with each other. The ground was riddled with holes, and the entire landscape changed in an instant. The mountain peaks were flattened, and the flat ground became a canyon. What a powerful battle strength! Gray teleported out of the hole in the star domain. After appearing outside the star domain, he looked at the two parties fighting. Within the star domain that extended for hundreds of miles, the landscape had completely changed. Not a single trace of its original state could be seen. The intensity of the battle between the two was much stronger than when he fought Saint Huolei. When he fought Saint Huolei, he only had a few head-on collisions. Most of the time, he was dodging with teleportation. However, the battle between Taylor Saint and Saint Huolei was a complete collision. It was a pure collision of attacks. Whoosh! After a wave of collisions, Saint Taylor and Saint Huolei approached each other and quickly collided with each other. Clang! The blue spear and the purple scepter collided, and a huge power that was not weaker than the collision between the gigantic star and the purple light erupted. Around them, there were cracks in space. Both of them were pushed back by the huge impact, but their attacks did not stop. Gigantic stars appeared and attacked Saint Taylor. A gigantic purple moon appeared and attacked with streaks of purple light. Rumble! With a deafening sound, Saint Taylor and Saint Huolei retreated from each other. Your battle strength has increased a lot, Saint Huolei said with fear. Aren't you the same? Saint Taylor's pretty face had a sneer. Do you still want to fight? If you want to fight, I'll accompany you to the end. I'll give you face this time. Saint Huolei snorted and removed the star domain. He glanced coldly at Gray and quickly flew away. After a probing exchange, he found that Saint Taylor's battle strength had increased again. Now, he did not have the confidence to face Saint Taylor. And the most troublesome thing was that Gray, who was weaker than them, could also participate in the battle. Therefore, he chose to retreat. Thank you for saving me, Saint Taylor. Looking at Saint Huolei, who retreated, Gray stepped forward and thanked Saint Taylor. Although Saint Huolei could not do anything to him with his teleportation ability and the pitch-black sword, he would still be in danger after a long time. Therefore, he was very grateful for Saint Taylor's help. Saint Gray, you're welcome. You're a distinguished guest of my moon temple. Attacking you is a provocation to my moon temple. A smile appeared on Saint Taylor's pretty face. Today's attack was bound to offend Xing Chun, but it was worth it because she could gain the friendship of a master refiner who could refine a law weapon. As for Sage Huolei's threat, she wasn't worried at all. Once Sage Gray refined a law weapon using the Moon Temple's law weapon materials, her combat strength would definitely soar. Sage Huolei was the one who should be worried. Following Saint Taylor into the Moon Temple, just like in the Plant Temple, Gray received the highest level of reception. After obtaining the materials of the Moon Temple's law weapon, Gray spent several days to successfully refine the law weapon of the Moon Temple. It was a scepter that was purple all over, like a branch of some kind of plant. At the top, there was a purple crescent moon that constantly emitted purple light. It looked quite extraordinary. Gray named it the Purple Moon Scepter. Since the law weapon has been successfully refined, I'll take my leave. Gray bid farewell to Saint Taylor. Saint Gray, Saint Huolei might still be nearby. Why don't you stay in the Moon Temple for a while? Saint Taylor urged him to stay. Thank you, but there's no need. With my teleportation ability, as long as he doesn't know my whereabouts, he can't do anything to me. Gray thanked her. He was going to cultivate in seclusion, and it was not appropriate to stay in the Moon Temple. Although the Moon Temple did not seem to be hostile to him, he still wanted to find a place where others could not find him. Chapter 851. After leaving the Moon Temple and teleporting continuously, Gray appeared on the island where the Earth Vein fruit had once grown. The Earth Vein fruit had already been harvested, and the people of the Earth Temple had already left. The island had now become an uninhabited island. Gray entered the plane he had created, but he didn't immediately use the law-type mana herbs to comprehend the laws. Instead, he took out pieces of metal for refining law weapons. There were rewards from a moon temple and plant temple, as well as leftovers from refining law weapons for the moon temple, plant temple, and order temple. All the materials added together were enough to refine a law weapon. Gray decided to refine the law weapon before comprehending the laws. After all, refining a law weapon would only take 2 or 3 days. He could afford to wait, even if he was in a hurry to comprehend the laws. Controlling the Crimson Beast, he used the law of refinement to scan all the metals, and the refining methods of several law weapons took shape in his mind. Gray chose a refining method that was more balanced and had a stronger amplification effect for all law abilities, and then began the refinement. Pieces of metal floated in the air, and balls of black flames burned the floating metal. The first step was to liquefy and purify. The second step was to mix the metal with liquid. After more than 2 days, the refining of the law weapon entered the third step, shaping. After pondering for a while, Gray molded the shape into an arm guard. The fourth step was to sort out and arrange the microscopic structure. With the law of refinement, it was easily completed. He then used ice to cool it down, and the refining of the law weapon was completed. Blood force was poured in and then retracted, and the law weapon liquefied into Gray's body. With a thought, the law weapon covered his left arm, covering everything from the wrist to the elbow. The sun sword appeared in his right hand as well. Gray tried to use the 2 law weapons to amplify the power of his law abilities, and immediately felt that the amplification effect had greatly increased compared to when he only had the sun sword. If he had 2 law weapons before, he wouldn't have been in such a difficult situation in the battle with Sage Horatio. It wouldn't have been impossible to turn defeat into victory, and he might even have been able to kill him. After putting away the 2 law weapons and resting for a day, Gray immersed himself in comprehending the laws. He took out a purple fruit. This was a soul fruit, a type of mana herb that was best for comprehending soul laws. After eating the fruit in a few bites, Gray found the puppet law ability among the many law abilities and began to comprehend it. The golem law was the ability to control other creatures and turn them into his own golem. It was a very powerful law ability with great potential. If Gray could develop this law ability to the limit, he could even immediately possess battle prowess comparable to the Koro Saint. Of course, this was just a hypothesis, and a hypothesis that was very difficult to fulfill. With Gray's current realm, he was unable to hunt down powerful nomological blood fiends. For example, the nomological blood fiend that had almost taken his life previously was naturally unable to develop its puppet nomological abilities to the limit. Meditating, resting, day after day, year after year. 2 years later, Gray successfully comprehended the puppet laws. It was slightly slower than comprehending the law of space with the help of the law of space, but it was much faster than comprehending the law of time with the law of time fruit. The law of time fruit really had an excellent effect on the comprehension of the law of soul. Comprehending the third law ability indicated that Gray had become a 3-law powerhouse. His realm was already on the same level as the Ori Saint. Coupled with the buffs from the Sun Sword and the Arm Guard, he was confident that he could kill the Ori Saint. After a short rest, Gray consumed an Earth Vein fruit and began to comprehend the 4th law ability, the Curse Law. The Curse Law was an ability to mobilize and trigger the laws through words. It was a very special ability. This ability had many forms of manifestation. Different owners could obtain different derivative abilities, and there were almost no repetitions. This was definitely one of the abilities with the most derivative abilities. There was no other ability that could compare to it. Gray's Curse Law ability had an enhanced derivative ability. It was not an offensive ability, but merely an auxiliary ability. However, in Gray's view, its value was even greater than those offensive derivative abilities. He, who had many law abilities, did not lack offensive means. It did not matter if he had one more or one less. However, an auxiliary method like enhancement could form a connection with other law abilities and greatly enhance the power of other law abilities. Such an auxiliary ability was obviously more useful than offensive abilities that could not form a connection with other law abilities. The reason Gray could survive the Ori Saint attack and persist until Saint Taylor arrived was mainly because he had the Golden Sword and the enhanced derivative ability of the Curse Law. It was the enhancement of this tool and ability that allowed him to persist until Saint Taylor arrived. After spending 4 years, Gray completely comprehended the Curse Law and became a 4-law powerhouse. It took him 4 years to fully comprehend the Earth Vein Fruit, which was much longer than the previous 3 attempts. The main reason for this was that the Earth Vein Fruit had a poor compatibility with the Curse Law. As a result, its effects were much worse than the previous 3 attempts. This was also because Gray had the super memory ability that helped with comprehension. Otherwise, it would have taken even longer. After thoroughly comprehending the 4 law abilities in his body, Gray took out the beast blood of the rule of I and swallowed it. Immediately, scorching heat and pain spread all over Gray's body. Sweat kept sliding down his body, and a rapid transformation took place in his body. After spending more than an hour, the sweaty Gray obtained the 5th law ability, the Rule of I. After consuming the Earth Vein Fruit, Gray began to comprehend the Rule of I. The Rule of I was a unique ability that had both offensive and searching abilities. The deepest impression Gray had of this ability was undoubtedly its searching ability. Because of this searching ability, he had fallen into the ambush of a law powerhouse. If not for the fact that this law powerhouse was a newly advanced law powerhouse and that his combat strength was not weaker than a newly advanced law powerhouse due to his many laws, he might have died. For years later, the various characteristics of the Rule of Eyes had been slowly comprehended by Gray, and he had achieved complete comprehension. At this point, Gray stopped comprehending. Although he still had 2 rule-type magic power fruits in his hand, there were no more laws that he could comprehend. It took him more than 10 years to comprehend the 3 laws, but the improvement it brought him was also huge. He had achieved the realm of 5 laws that had only been heard of in the history of the Origin world. With a step, he left the plane and appeared on the island. After a few teleportations, he appeared on the mainland. What's going on? When he appeared on the mainland, Gray immediately noticed the strangeness of the scenery in front of him. In his memory, this place was originally a forest that stretched for hundreds of miles. But now, the forest had disappeared and the ground was in ruins. It was full of crisscrossing scars, and he couldn't see the end of it. It was the same everywhere he looked. These scars looked extremely ferocious. Even now, they still carried a faint, terrifying aura. This terrifying aura caused there to be no life in this area at all. There were law enforcers fighting here. It should have been a few years ago. Judging from the traces of their abilities, there were at least 5 law enforcers fighting here. Chapter 852. At least 5 Maxim contenders are fighting. What happened that caused so many Maxim contenders to fight? With doubts in his heart, Gray teleported to the city where the Earth Holy Cathedral was located, preparing to summon St. Walter to find out what had happened. He's not here. To Gray's surprise, St. Walter was not in the Earth Holy Cathedral because he did not sense St. Walter in the Earth Holy Cathedral. A trace of surprise rose in his heart. Through the soul connection, Gray contacted St. Walter. The next moment, his expression turned puzzled. I can't contact him. He could not contact St. Walter, but he was certain that St. Walter was not dead. This was because his connection with St. Walter still existed, but it was blocked by some kind of isolation and could not communicate smoothly. As he entered a dimension, or the void zone, to be able to isolate soul connection, it must be because St. Walter was in a place that could isolate soul connection. The only place he could think of was the dimension and the void zone. Let's ask Rover. He contacted St. Luo Fu and was shocked again. The connection with St. Luo Fu also existed, but it was blocked by some kind of barrier and could not be communicated. What's going on? Gray's heart was filled with doubts. It would be fine if it was only one person, but it was strange that he could not contact the 2 Maxim contenders under him. He could not help but think of the battlefield not long ago, where at least 5 Maxim contenders participated in the battle. It was too strange. His intuition told him that the battlefield was likely related to his inability to contact the two Maxim contenders under him. After sensing for a moment, he found that the Earth Holy Cathedral's Lord was in the Earth Holy Cathedral, so he summoned him. Soon after, he rushed over. Sir Gray. Seeing Gray, the Earth Holy Cathedral's Lord bowed respectfully. Gray nodded slightly and asked, "What's going on? What's going on? Why can't I contact Walter and Rover? St. Walter and St. Luo Fu should be in the Void Zone now." The Earth Holy Cathedral's Lord replied. "Why did they go to the Void Zone, both of them?" Gray raised his eyebrows. "They've entered the Void Zone to kill the War Creatures. Along with them are the Maxim contenders from the other temples. Now, almost all the Maxim contenders from the temples have entered the Void Zone. Beastmen, War Creatures have appeared, and they require all the law enforcers of the Holy Sanctum to surround and kill them." Gray was shocked, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. War Creatures were people who failed to implant a new bloodline into their original bloodline. Their bodies would turn into beasts, and they would grow the characteristics of blood fiends, such as sharp claws, fangs, ears, tails. It would have been fine if it was just a change in appearance, but the key was that they had failed to implant their bloodlines and become beastmen. Their minds had been controlled by their bestial instincts, and they had completely turned into wild beasts. Although such people still had the characteristics of humans, they could no longer be called humans. They could only be called beasts. "What's going on? Tell me in detail." Yes. Following the Earth Holy Cathedral's Lord's narration, Gray finally understood the ins and outs of the matter. About a few years ago, a War Creature suddenly appeared and attacked a Saint-level faction. He displayed his formidable strength and completely annihilated the Saint-level faction along with all the law enforcers. Subsequently, this War Creature destroyed several Saint-level factions in succession. The various Saint-level factions were in a state of panic, so they formed an alliance to surround and kill the War Creature. The reason why all the law enforcers of the Holy Sanctum had gone to the Void Zone was because the War Creature had escaped into the Void Zone after killing several law enforcers under the siege of a group of law enforcers. To be able to kill several law enforcers and escape under the siege of a group of law enforcers, this War Creature is very powerful. Gray was slightly shocked. The formation of the battlefield he had seen earlier was self-evident. What shocked him was that even with the joint forces of all the law enforcers of the Origin world, they were still unable to kill this War Creature. One could only imagine how powerful this War Creature was. According to our investigation, this War Creature was a saint of the Ice Temple when he was alive. He was a 3-law enforcer. After becoming a War Creature, his battle prowess skyrocketed, surpassing 3 laws. The Earth Holy Cathedral's Lord said solemnly. He was a saint of the Ice Temple when he was alive. Could it be that the destruction of the Ice Temple was caused by this War Creature? Gray could not help but recall the news of the Ice Temple's destruction that he had heard 10 years ago in the Orderly Temple. Now that he thought about it, the Ice Temple was destroyed because the saint of the Ice Temple had failed to implant his bloodline. The War Creature had gone berserk and destroyed the Ice Temple. Such a powerful War Creature is a disaster for the Origin world. If we're not careful, I'm afraid the entire Origin world will be destroyed. Gray's face revealed a contemplative look. 500,000 years later, the Origin world's overall strength was clearly weaker than it had been 500,000 years ago. Apart from the exception of St. Koro, the strongest were only veteran law enforcers. There were no proven 3 law enforcers. Now that he thought about it, the turning point that caused the Origin world's overall strength to decline was very likely this War Creature. Should I make a move? Gray was somewhat hesitant. Although this War Creature was powerful, with his current strength as a 5-law enforcer, he should be able to kill him. However, he was hesitant about whether or not he should kill the War Creatures. If he killed the War Creature, it was very likely that it would have a huge impact on history, affecting the Origin world space-time. However, if he did not make a move, the Origin world would probably suffer heavy losses this time. I can't interfere. After serious consideration, Gray came to the conclusion that he could not make a move. If he did, it would have a huge impact on the Origin world space-time. The impact would be so great that it might completely overturn the origin world. Still, there's no harm in watching. After leaving the city where the Earth Holy Cathedral was located, Gray waved his hand, and a huge spatial rift appeared. At his current realm, he could tear space apart with just a lift of his hand. Large amounts of air and even gravel were being sucked into the spatial rift. Gray stepped out and entered the Void Zone. The Void Zone was a vacuum world without air. In this world, normal creatures could not survive. Only creatures like the Void Beasts, which are different from life forms of flesh and blood, could survive. Of course, law enforcers were an exception. They had already broken the shackles of their own species. To a certain extent, they had already broken away from the human species. They could also survive in the Void Zone. Gray had been a law enforcer for some time now, but this was his first time entering the Void Zone. This was a dark world without any light. Similarly, there was no sound. In a place without air as a medium, sound could not be transmitted at all. Not far from him, there was a pitch-black barrier whose end could not be seen. This was the barrier of the origin world. It was because of this barrier that the origin world was able to avoid the attacks of the Void Beasts. On top of the black barrier whose end could not be seen, there were protrusions formed by the same black barrier. They were like shells stuck on top of the barrier. These were probably dimensions. He did not see the were creatures or the law enforcers of the various holy cathedrals. The Void Zone was simply too vast, even vaster than the origin world. It was natural that he would not see them. Chapter 853. Walter. Without the obstruction of the world's barrier, Gray quickly contacted Walter Sage through soul contact. Sir Gray. Walter Sage hurriedly greeted him respectfully after receiving Gray's contact. I've heard about the were creatures. What's the situation now? Gray inquired. We fought a few months ago, but the other party escaped very quickly. Now, the Maxim contenders of the various sanctuaries have spread out to search the Void Zone. Search? Give me a detailed description of the were creatures. Gray's heart stirred as he instructed. Although he could not participate in the encirclement of the were creatures, there was no harm in helping to search. I'm Maxim. After listening to Walter Sage's description of the were creatures, Gray used the eye Maxim, and a golden vertical eye appeared between his brows. Various images flashed quickly in the golden vertical eye, and soon, a strange-looking creature appeared in his eyes. The strange-looking creature was on a huge floating rock, covered in gray fur. It had a wolf-like sharp mouth, wolf-like green eyes, a wolf-like tail, and wolf-like pointy ears. Its appearance was extremely similar to a wolf, but although its hands and feet had sharp claws that flickered with cold light, it stood in human form, just like a human. The tall figure was more than 2 meters tall, almost 2.5 meters tall, and looked extremely oppressive. This should be the were creature. This was the first time Gray had seen a were creature. Just as the rumors said, it had completely transformed into a wild beast. In its eyes, Gray saw the light of a wild beast. It was a light of extreme madness, extreme coldness, and extreme bloodthirstiness. After informing Walter Sage of the were creature's location through soul contact, Gray found a meteorite as a foothold, and quietly waited for the outbreak of this battle that would have a huge impact on the origin world. Walter Sage pretended to inadvertently search for the were creatures, and then used the magic rune machine to contact the other Maxim contenders. A day later, the Maxim contenders who received the news arrived one after another and met up with Walter Sage. Once everyone had arrived, they suddenly took action, surrounding and attacking the were creatures from all directions. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Terrifying explosions erupted in that area, causing the area to become dazzling. It was as if nuclear bombs were exploding in that area one after another. With 5 powerhouses of 3 laws in their hands, and other powerhouses of laws supporting them, a total of dozens of powerhouses of laws besieged the were creatures. Rays of light from the power of laws intertwined. The were creature that was being besieged by them was naturally extremely powerful. Large amounts of white fog suddenly erupted from his body, and the attacks that were attacking him were instantly frozen and annihilated. However, even with the were creature's strength, they couldn't completely block the attacks of dozens of law enforcers. From time to time, attacks would break through the weird creature's white fog and crash in their bodies, leaving wounds on their bodies. This completely infuriated the war creature. With a roar, the war creature burst forth with a speed that exceeded 3 laws, directly pouncing on a powerhouse with 3 laws. His sharp claws flickered with cold light, like several law weapons slicing towards the powerhouse with 3 laws. This 3 precepts powerhouse held a white blade-type precepts weapon in his hand. When he saw the war creatures pouncing at him, he swung his blade horizontally to meet the sharp claws that were slicing down. Asterisk clang. Asterisk the two collided fiercely, and a terrifying shockwave erupted from the collision. Then, this 3 precepts powerhouse was sent flying like a cannonball. After the weird creature's body paused for a moment, he pounced on the nearest precepts powerhouse behind the 3 precepts powerhouse. Asterisk whoosh. Asterisk, this was a veteran precept powerhouse that Gray didn't recognize. When he saw the war creature pouncing at him, his face was immediately filled with shock. Silver lines appeared in front of him one after another, interweaving into a net to block in front of him while he retreated rapidly. One of the abilities of this veteran precepts powerhouse should be the Law of Lines. This was a law ability that was both offensive and defensive. The lines created by this law ability were extremely tough and difficult to cut. Asterisk clang, clang, clang. Asterisk, however, the weird creature's combat strength far exceeded that of the veteran precepts powerhouse. Under his sharp claws, the lines created by the precepts were easily cut. The war creature took a step forward and caught up with the retreating veteran precepts powerhouse. His other claw, with a sharp claw that was dozens of centimeters long, slashed down diagonally. Pooh! Under this sharp claw, the veteran precepts powerhouse's chest was almost cut open. His innards, including his heart, were completely dug out. Fresh blood and organs splattered everywhere. With a blood-curdling scream, the veteran precepts powerhouse died on the spot. The weird creature's bloodthirsty gaze stared at another veteran precepts powerhouse. Fortunately, at this moment, the other 4 precepts powerhouses reacted and attacked the war creature with their precepts abilities. Faced with the joint attack of 4 precepts powerhouses, even the war creature felt danger. A dense white fog erupted from his body to block these attacks. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the veteran precepts powerhouses retreated to increase the distance between them. The 3 precepts powerhouses who had been sent flying quickly rushed back. After all, they were precepts powerhouses. Although they were injured by the weird creature's attack, it wasn't too serious. This was a tragic battle. The weird creature's injuries were getting worse and worse, and the number of precepts besieging him was gradually decreasing. Roar! A few hours later, the war creature was completely killed with a despairing howl. At this time, there were only 2 precepts powerhouses left. There were only a dozen precepts powerhouses left. A total of 3 precepts powerhouses and over 20 precepts powerhouses had died in this battle. It could be said to be an unprecedentedly tragic battle. One could imagine how many temples would decline or even be destroyed after today. At this point, Gray was certain that this was the reason why the overall combat power of the origin world had been greatly weakened after 500,000 years. The precepts powerhouses were all injured, their faces full of complicated expressions. Such a tragic battle made them sigh endlessly. Fortunately, they were the ones who survived. Among them, Walter Saint and Rolf Saint had survived. Their combat power was at the top of the precepts powerhouses. In addition, they were only assisting from afar and weren't the main force, so they survived. Their lives are really long. Under the precepts of I, Gray looked at the 2 precepts who had survived. One of them was a beautiful woman. She was Saint Taylor of the Moon Temple. The other was an old man. It was Saint Ori of the Star Temple who had attacked him before. Thinking of the other party's attack, Gray's eyes couldn't help but reveal killing intent. He couldn't excessively affect this space-time, so he didn't participate in this battle. However, killing a precepts powerhouse would undoubtedly have a much smaller impact. If he killed them and then resurrected them, the impact would be even smaller. Bang! At this moment, under Gray's precepts of Saint Ori's eyes suddenly flashed with a ruthless glint. He then suddenly attacked Saint Taylor, who wasn't far away. The spear-type weapon in his hand was probably borrowed. It carried a resplendent blue light as it pierced towards Saint Taylor. Faced with the sudden attack, Saint Taylor hurriedly raised the moon scepter in his hand to block, but he only managed to slightly deflect the incoming spear. The spear pierced through his abdomen, and his entire body spilled blood as he flew backwards. Saint Taylor, Saint Ori, the sudden turn of events caused the expressions of the dozen or so surviving precepts to change greatly. They all looked at Saint Ori in shock and anger. Their comrade, who had just fought side by side, suddenly attacked their comrade. This shocked and angered them. This was the void zone, and sound could not be transmitted. However, they were all precepts with extremely powerful souls. They could communicate with soul fluctuations like sound. This is a grudge between me and Saint Taylor. If you don't want to die, shut up. Faced with the angry voices of the dozen or so precepts, Saint Ori snorted coldly and threatened. Although these law enforcers were all heavily injured and their battle prowess had been greatly reduced, there were still more than 10 of them. If they were to go all out, he might very well die under the siege of these people, just like the war creatures not long ago. Therefore, he threatened them, saying that this was a grudge between him and Saint Taylor, so that these precepts would be wary and not dare to fight him. You were fighting side by side just now, and in the next moment, you're killing him. Even if you have a grudge with Saint Taylor, this is too. That's right, Saint Ori, you've gone too far. Faced with the Saint Ori's murderous threat, the shocked and furious precepts gradually calmed down as if they had been splashed with cold water. Although they were still condemning him, their tone had clearly softened. With the Saint Ori's strength of 3 precepts, if he really went all out, even if the dozen or so of them joined forces, there would definitely be casualties. None of them dared to guarantee that they would not be among the casualties. Most importantly, it was difficult for the dozen or so of them to join forces. The reason they could join forces to besiege and kill the beastmen was that the beastmen treated them as prey. They had no choice but to join forces, or else they would be killed by the beastmen one by one. However, now, Saint Ori had clearly stated that this was a grudge between him and Saint Taylor, and would not threaten them. Immediately, they could not help but think of retreating. Although they were comrades in arms who had fought side by side with Saint Taylor, their relationship was not so good that they would risk their lives for each other. Chapter 854. Saint Taylor, 10 years ago, you saved that guy and became my enemy. Now it's time for you to die. Seeing that he had shocked the other law powerhouses, Saint Hualei turned around and looked at Saint Taylor coldly. Cough, cough. Don't use Saint Gray as an excuse. Do you really think I can't see through your intentions? A big hole appeared in his abdomen, and Saint Taylor coughed out large mouthfuls of blood. His lips were stained with blood, and it was extremely beautiful. If it were anyone else, they would have died long ago. However, he was a law powerhouse after all, and his vitality was strong. After swallowing the healing potion, the huge hole in his chest was slowly recovering. Hearing Saint Hualei's reason for attacking her, she smiled disdainfully. Saving Saint Gray from the other party 10 years ago was one of the reasons the other party had attacked her, but it was definitely not the main reason. The main reason was probably because she was the only one who could contend against the other party among the rule-level powerhouses who were still alive. You just want to get rid of me and unify the origin world. Do you really think I can't see through it? Do you want to drag the others down with you? Do you think the others will believe your nonsense? All right, you could die now. Saint Taylor guessed his plan, and Saint Hua lay cursed inwardly. Killing intent burst out of his eyes, and the spear in his hand shot out a blue light. A miniature star condensed at the tip of the spear, and he quickly stabbed at the heavily injured Saint Taylor. Saint Hua lay plans to unify the origin world. Hearing Saint Taylor's words, the expressions of the other law powerhouses suddenly changed. If Saint Hualei's plan was to unify the origin world, then after killing Saint Taylor, they would probably become his target. If that was the case, They had to save St. Taylor because he was the only one among the remaining rule-level powerhouses who could contend against the other party. Stop! They immediately attacked to save St. Taylor, but they realized that it was too late. The spear with the miniature star condensed at the tip of the spear had already stabbed at St. Taylor's heart. Although St. Taylor dragged his heavily injured body back to dodge, his injuries were too severe and his movements were severely affected. It was obvious that he could not dodge. Die. St. Huolei revealed a sinister smile. The other party had nowhere to run. Pung! Just as the tip of the spear was about to pierce St. Taylor's heart, an invisible barrier suddenly appeared between the spear and St. Taylor. The tip of the spear that had condensed a miniature star struck the invisible barrier, and the miniature star abruptly exploded, bursting with power that far surpassed the giant star Gray had encountered before. That was because this star was condensed from the power of the star domain and the augmentation of a law weapon. Despite that, under the terrifying power, the interspatial barrier rippled like a piece of cloth, but it did not shatter. It completely blocked the terrifying attack. What? Terrifying fluctuations erupted from the point of collision, and a powerful recoil forced St. Huolei to retreat. He looked at the invisible barrier in front of St. Taylor and blocked the fierce attack just now. With his special vision as a master of laws, he could naturally see this barrier that ordinary people couldn't see. However, he still stabbed down because he was extremely confident in his attack. However, the result surprised him. After the augmentation of a law weapon, the attack's power could reach the peak of 3 laws, but it was blocked by this barrier that did not seem thick. He was truly stunned. Who is it? He looked at the other law powerhouses in bewilderment. Only these people would save St. Taylor at this time. However, with their strength, it was reasonable to say that they should not be able to block his attack at the peak of 3 laws. This shocked and puzzled him. Could it be that someone among these law powerhouses was hiding their strength? Was it not a veteran law powerhouse, but a powerhouse of 3 laws like him? It's me. A soul fluctuation rang out. St. Huolei suddenly turned his head and saw a figure appear not far from St. Taylor. It was a young man with black hair. He looked extremely young and was dressed in noble attire, making him look like a noble young master. It's you. You've actually comprehended 3 laws. 3 laws, huh? I can give you more surprises than that. The corner of Gray's mouth rose slightly as he looked at St. Huolei with slight ridicule. He had never been here before and was tens of thousands of kilometers away from here. However, the specialty of the teleportation ability was that within a certain range, he could teleport to any place he had seen or been to before. Although he had not been here before with the Law of Eye, he had seen this place before. Therefore, he could quickly teleport here. Good, you're very good. I'll remember what happened today. St. Horatio glanced at St. Taylor, who was heavily injured and could be killed with just one more strike. St. Horatio's face showed a trace of unwillingness, but he still made the right choice. He glared fiercely at Gray, turned into a blue light, and flew in the opposite direction. With Gray, an uninjured powerhouse of 3 laws, and St. Taylor, who was heavily injured but still had 3 laws, as well as the surrounding law powerhouses who were faintly hostile toward him, he no longer had a chance of winning. Therefore, he turned and fled. You remember? There's no need to go through so much trouble. Let's settle it today. Gray sneered. Spatial fluctuations quickly spread out with him as the center. He quickly caught up to the fleeing St. Huolei and swept past him. St. Huolei, who had fled several kilometers away, suddenly disappeared. When he reappeared, he was hundreds of meters away from Gray and was facing Gray. A method to transfer spatial coordinates. St. Huolei's expression changed drastically as he rushed toward Gray. He had encountered this method before and understood how powerful it was. Knowing that he could no longer escape, he revealed a resolute expression. Let's see who will die today. A wave spread out with him as the center. His star domain spread out and quickly swept past Gray, St. Taylor, and the other law powerhouses who were hundreds of meters away. Everyone was included in his star domain. He was the strongest under his star domain. Clearly, he had decided to fight to the death. Boom, boom, boom. A large number of stars condensed and turned into gigantic stars with diameters of thousands of meters. They crashed toward Gray with dazzling blue light. Gray's expression was calm. With his current realm, he could easily avoid the star domain. However, he did not do so because there was no need. Rumble, rumble, rumble. One by one, the incoming gigantic stars suddenly changed their direction and collided with each other. In the pitch-black void zone, terrifying rays of light bloomed one after another, as if nuclear bombs were exploding. Although part of the spatial maze was covered by the star domain, the covered part did not lose the ability to teleport. As for destroying the teleportation point of the spatial maze, the spatial maze cast by Gray's current realm could not be destroyed by the destructive power of the gigantic stars. Whoosh! While blocking the attack with spatial teleportation, Gray's figure disappeared and reappeared beside Saint Horatio Lay. Without using any power of the natural order, he only relied on the strength of his physical body and punched the Saint Horatio Lay. With the huge gap between the two realms, Saint Horatio Lay did not have time to raise a spear to block before he was punched in the chest by Gray. Bang! The sound of ribs breaking came from his chest, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Saint Horatio Lay flew backward and crashed into a huge floating rock like an island. Immediately, a huge crater appeared on the rock. His whole body was in severe pain. Before he could get up to check on his body, Gray's figure teleported and appeared again. A kick like a battle axe struck his abdomen. Bang! Saint Horatio Lay's body bent violently like a prawn. Countless bones in his body were broken. With him as the center, cracks appeared all over the floating rock like an island. Cough, cough, you're not a 3-law. Saint Horatio Lay spat out blood again and again, his eyes full of horror. Just the strength of his physical body had such destructive power. This was not something a 3-law contender could do. What shocked him even more was that the other party's strength was even stronger than the Were creature, who was comparable to a 4-law contender. The Were creature's strength was already terrifying enough, but the other party's strength far exceeded the Were creature's. There was obviously a gap of a major realm. An extremely horrifying guess appeared in his mind. Was the other party already a 5-law contender? However, how was this possible? 10 years ago, the other party was only a veteran Maxim contender. How could he have advanced 3 realms in just 10 years when it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens?